Hello, Rob, and members of the PGS community. In a recent interview with the Transporter Room 3 podcast, Jonathan Frakes shared some insightful comments on New Trek.
I like that her and Picard aren't instant buddies, right? I mean, that's one of the things about this new show, I guess, which must be kind of different for you as a director behind the camera, right? I mean, like on Next Generation, everyone had to kind of always get along to a certain degree, right?
That was the Roddenberry approach to there being no conflict.
Yeah.
Which made it very hard, again, for the writers, where drama is built on conflict. And Gene's adage about the future, his beautiful vision of the future, was without conflict. Our episodes were meant to be morality plays or cautionary tales.
Yeah.
And the new Star Trek, the Discovery and Picard, are filled with more complicated relationships where there is doubt and suspicion and resentment and qualities that Gene discouraged us from playing and discouraged the writers from writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, do you think that that's necessary, this, in the year 2020, that, like, these are the kinds of stories that we need to tell now?
That's exactly what I think, and that's very much the intention of the show. And I think part of the success, the early success of Picard, is not only hung on Patrick and Michael and Akiva and Alex's talent, but also on the timing of the painful situations we're in as a country.
Yeah, for sure.
This idea of the current presence and previous absence of conflict is at the center of the schism in Star Trek fandom. And is it even true? Conflict has always been a part of Star Trek. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy argued frequently on how to approach challenges they faced in their missions. And episodes like A Private Little War or The Measure of a Man force characters to make tough choices and ponder moral dilemmas. Just because humanity had maximized its potential didn't mean that challenges didn't lie ahead, where no one had gone before. How come a show like The Orville is able to follow a formula much closer to original Star Trek, and still present situations of conflict where the protagonists wrestle with themes and topics that speak to our present reality yet show a hopeful future path? Are the creators behind New Trek confusing conflict with darkness and grittiness at the expense of Roddenberry's vision for the future? I'd love to hear what you, Rob, and fellow PGS members have to say. Thank you, and see you next time.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your sommelier of cinema. And of course, as everyone knows, let's say it one more time, because I love saying it. Your existential Mr. Rogers, your Archduke of Banterbury, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, Robert Meyer Burnett, and welcome to this, Robservations, episode number 398, take 3. I've made some changes. I don't know. My computer went down twice during John Campia's stream this morning, so one never knows what's going to happen, but I will soldier on, and even if it goes down, I will turn it back on and see if I can continue the stream. Frankly, what has been happening is the Robservatory is quite hot, and LA went from being in the 60s, 50s, and 60s to jumping up to 85 and 90 degrees, and I didn't have enough time to compensate with air conditioning and things like that. So I was hoping it would be a gradually ramping up situation, but it certainly wasn't. So we shall soldier on. The show must go on. Anyway, welcome to Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 398, take 3. And there's a lot to discuss. First of all, the 400th episode of this show, all things considered, is going to happen on Monday. I have announced I have 5 celebrity guests joining us in pre-recorded interviews that I have done, including actress Barbara Crampton, comics artist legend Bill Sienkiewicz, Star Trek Discovery and Hannibal creator Brian Fuller, producer-director Carrie David, and Star Trek writer-producer Melinda Snodgrass, who's also a novelist, and she's best friends with George R.R. Martin. All of these interviews have already been shot and recorded and in the can. I'm editing them. They're very long. The Bill Sienkiewicz interview is a 2-hour-long interview, so we're going to see excerpts from these interviews on the show. I will debut them there, and then later on I'm going to put them all up as long-form interviews, Joe Rogan style, on the show, on the Burnettwork. So, like, subscribe so you'll be notified. Hit that little bell when those interviews go up. They're all incredibly compelling interviews, and I want to thank everybody that graciously decided to give me their time in order for me to interview them to be on the 400th show. And as many of you have known, I've always wanted to sort of turn this show more into that kind of a thing. Not always. I'm not going to interview somebody all the time, because I know a lot of you people, for whatever reason, you love being here and listening to me chatter away, which I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, people have sent in super chats over the last couple days and tips and things like that. I will get to those. I am now backed up with letters, but so we'll do episode 398 today and then episode 399 tomorrow. Sunday, I am going to be participating in, for those of you who don't know, actually Saturday and Sunday, I will be participating in the Mainframe Online Comic Con. And on Saturday, I will be interviewing Andy Park, who is the director of visual development at Marvel Studios. He has been the director of visual development at Marvel Studios since 2010. 10 years before that, for 10 years, he was a comic book artist, and he did things like, he was really the designer of, say, the Ant-Man costume and Hela. So that should be interesting. Tune in to that. And then I will also be doing a number of panels on Sunday, which I will announce tomorrow. So that should be fun. You know what is more fun? Robcasting it. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. I've missed you guys. I've also been frustrated and angry. But hopefully the situation has alleviated itself. Although, if it goes down, if I said the stream goes down, I'm going to put it back up. It might take me a few minutes. Who knows? Now, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about that I didn't get to talk about the other day is, I don't know if anyone has been following this idea or on social media. A lot of people on Twitter have been posting this idea of what is a perfect movie. Here are your 5 perfect movies. Many filmmakers have weighed in on this. Many celebrities have weighed in on what is a perfect movie. And I thought that was kind of fun. I really sort of enjoyed this idea. And what's really interesting is one of the movies that I've always considered to be perfect is Back to the Future. I think Back to the Future is a pretty perfect script. And I've been saying that for years. And I, to be honest, was not aware that, according to many people out there, there is a massive plot hole in Back to the Future that, I guess, diminished Back to the Future's status as being a perfect film. And here was the plot hole. The plot hole is that Marty's parents, when he comes back from the past, he goes back to the future, at the end of the film, that his parents do not recognize him as being Calvin Klein. Well, I certainly have never considered that a plot hole. I mean, they knew him for a brief moment in time. How many people do you remember 25 years ago? Even if they left an indelible impression on you, if you're only there for a few days. And let's face it, what was really most important is that Crispin Glover and Leah Thompson fell in love. And I think that's pretty much all they're going to remember about that time. And Marty's character, I mean, he wasn't exactly that significant, aside from the fact that he was what sort of brought them together. But it doesn't mean they're going to remember what he looks like after 25 years. So I've never considered that to be a plot hole in the film. However, other people have. And in The Hollywood Reporter, Chris Pratt came out in defense of Back to the Future. And he's this article The question of why Marty McFly's parents don't remember him has been debated amongst fans for decades. I'm like, I've never debated that, but okay. And this article was in the Hollywood Reporter on the 22nd, and it's by Ryan Parker. And it goes on to say, people have a lot of time on their hands right now, and thus a number of entertaining social media trends have emerged. One of the more popular is the 5 Perfect Movies game, in which Twitter users share their top 5 films to watch amid coronavirus shutdown. What started as a fun list turned into some serious business as stars and filmmakers began to debate just what makes a film perfect. One such instance was Marvel filmmaker James Gunn, who argued via Twitter a perfect film can be different from a favorite film or a great film. A perfect film is something that sings from start to finish with no obvious mistakes, whether they be aesthetic or structural. There are no logical lapses. He listed a number of picks, including Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, as among his favorites, but not to the level of perfect films. Gunn also pointed to 1985's Back to the Future, writing, Back to the Future seemingly could be imperfect. Why don't Mom and Dad remember Marty? But I would still argue it's a perfect film because there are reasons why this could conceivably be the case. Time protects itself from unraveling, etc., or maybe I'm in denial. Who knows? Enter Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy co-star Chris Pratt, who explained the situation as best he saw it. Maybe they do remember him, though, not as Marty, as Calvin. When Marty returns to present day in 1985, it could have been years since his parents would have perhaps originally noted the uncanny resemblance between their son and that kid from high school 20 years previous, Pratt said via Twitter. I'm with Chris Pratt on this. The question of why Marty's parents do not remember him has been debated among fans for decades, and even spoofed on Family Guy with a cutaway gag in which George accuses Lorraine of cheating on him with Calvin. Well, let me just tell you, I've often debated people about these kinds of things, what appear to be plot holes in films, and it's been sort of, in my own life, a frustrating experience. It began with my Star Trek career, obviously. When I was watching Star Trek as a kid, I was always trying to, in my own mind, I would create answers to questions that don't necessarily have to be answered. Like, for instance, everyone who knows their classic Star Trek lore knows that there is the United Earth Space Probe Agency that eventually becomes or morphs or somehow turns into the United Federation of Planets. And why isn't the United Federation of Planets mentioned in the first season of Star Trek? Now, I've always thought that nitpicks like this, clearly the show is developing and they hadn't figured out all of this mythology. They're making it up as they go. However, sometimes I find that to be annoying as hell, because there's no way in God's green earth that you could have made that leap. However, I've always considered that there are elements of stories that they just don't get into, that you, living in the real world, coming out of the real world, I don't know everything about, say, how local Pasadena city government works. I assume there's a city council and all this, but there are many different groups that are part of the Pasadena, the local. This is my hometown right now. Not my hometown's Mercer Island, Washington, but I mean where I live now. There's a lot about the inner workings of the Pasadena government that I don't know. I'm probably unaware of. So when somebody's discussing one element of the Pasadena businesses that I don't know, I can make that leap and go, oh, I didn't know they had that. But it doesn't become some kind of some big thing that ruins my whole day about, there's a continuity error here. In living in the real world, I've always assumed that they're just things I don't know. I know that's the case. So when I'm watching a show that's big on world building and canonical accuracy, I just assume if it feels right, and I can, in my mind, figure out some way, like in this case, that I could buy into it. If I can buy into it, then it's okay. And in the case of Back to the Future, if Marty is going back to the 50s and, say, 20, 25 years transpire between the time, why would Lorraine and her husband, Mr. McFly, why would they remember somebody they knew for less than a week? And that never bothered me. I don't think that's a continuity error. Think about your own life. I remember recently I think I was at Rise of Skywalker. When I was at Rise of Skywalker, there was an executive from Disney I used to work with, John Bernstein. Now, I hadn't seen him in a number of years. I hadn't seen him in probably 10 years. And he said, hey, man, he reached out to me, and he introduced himself. He reintroduced himself. He said, John Bernstein. I'm like, oh, yes, I know who you are. I knew exactly who he was. He didn't have to say that. But I tend to do that as well when I run into people I know I haven't seen them in a while, or I know that I met them in a rather casual environment in the first place, that there's no reason that they would remember who I am. I always take it upon myself to introduce myself or reintroduce myself, and I go, hey, man, Rob Burnett, good to meet you. And I'll give them a quick reminder if I feel it necessary where we first met, maybe to give them a little bit more credibility when they're talking to me or something. So I've never considered this a plot hole. Well, anyway, Bob Gale, who co-wrote the script for Back to the Future with Robert Zemeckis, weighed in on this also on the 22nd. This was in the Hollywood Reporter as well. Ryan Parker writes about this, and the article, the heading is Back to the Future screenwriter closes plot hole amid renewed debate. Bob Gale ends the decades-long argument among fans once and for all. The debate about an apparent plot hole in Back to the Future recently reignited amid the popular social media trend 5 Perfect Movies. That is, until screenwriter Bob Gale closed the case for good. What started as a fun Twitter list for the top 5 movie suggestions to watch during quarantine turned into some serious business as stars and filmmakers began to debate just what makes a film perfect. Marvel filmmaker James Gunn argued via Twitter, a perfect film can be different from a favorite film or a great film. A perfect film is something that sings from start to finish with no obvious mistakes. And then he pointed to Back to the Future. And then Chris Pratt continued, like I just read. Well, according to this article, Chris Pratt is correct. Bob Gale, the screenwriter for Back to the Future, settled the debate once and for all Wednesday, telling the Hollywood Reporter, bear in mind that George and Lorraine only knew Marty or Calvin for 8 days when they were 17, and they did not even see him every one of those 8 days. So many years later, they still might remember that interesting kid who got them together on their first date. But he continued, I would ask anyone to think back on their own high school days and ask themselves how well they remember a kid who might have been at their school for even a semester, or someone you went out with just one time. If you had no photo reference after 25 years, you'd probably just have a hazy recollection, concluded Gale. So Lorraine and George might think it funny that they once actually met someone named Calvin Klein, and even if they thought their son at age 16 or 17 had some resemblance to him, it wouldn't be a big deal. I bet most of us could look through our high school yearbooks and find photos of our teenage classmates that bear some resemblance to our children. Case closed, Doc, according to Bob Gale. I agree with him. Now, I really liked this 5 Perfect Movies idea. And it's funny because I thought back with James Gunn talking about one of his favorite movies being Raiders of the Lost Ark. There has always been a debate raging about Raiders of the Lost Ark, how there is a massive plot hole. And that plot hole is when Indiana Jones jumps off the Bantu Wind and swims over to the German U-boat, he apparently is clinging to the periscope the entire time the U-boat makes its way to the island, which is not an insubstantial distance that's covered there. And a lot of people would say, well, what happens when that U-boat submerges? And my answer to that has always been, well, clearly it didn't submerge. But everybody says, well, what if it did? I'm like, it didn't. And it didn't, as evidenced by the fact that Indiana Jones was able to stay on that. And there's really no reason. I mean, was there a wartime footing at that part of the... were they on a wartime footing at that part, in that part of the world at that particular time? If they didn't need to submerge, they didn't need to submerge. But people have always often thrown back at me because I consider Raiders of the Lost Ark a perfect movie. And when I say perfect movie, I would say that a perfect movie doesn't mean that, occasionally there's some visual effects. Like, I don't consider an unconvincing visual effect a lack of perfection. I chalk that up to the technology that was available at the time. And I think that's really important. And I think Alien to me is a perfect movie. Some people would say, well, the computer displays now, they just don't look very convincing for a ship in the future. And these are the kind of mental leaps that I make in my mind. I'm like, look, man, the movie was made in 1979. The fact that the displays are not 16:9, no one knew that. So those are, I would say, I wouldn't call them errors, but I would say that those are technological anachronisms that were a function of when the movie was made. I think All About Eve is a perfect movie, just because there's shoddy rear projection or unconvincing rear projection, or that the film is in black and white, doesn't, in my mind, take away from its lack of perfection. The same is true of, say, Casablanca. I mean, these are movies that entertain from beginning to end, where you literally, to my mind, a movie that would be considered, say, perfect is a movie that will sweep you up and cast a spell over you for the entire duration of the film. You even if movies have egregious plot holes, if you don't recognize them or don't feel them or notice them while you're watching the movie and the entertainment value is there, that's what you want. You want an unbroken magical spell that a movie casts. I mean, first of all, the whole debate of whether a movie is perfect or not is kind of silly, but I think the whole idea of it, that what are the films that you always go to again and again and again that represent the magic of cinema? I mean, I find, of course, The Shawshank Redemption to be a perfect movie. I think Amelie is a perfect movie. Now, there are some people that can't buy into the film in the first place, but I don't think, again, that's where subjectivity, I was going to talk about this yesterday, but I don't believe that all art and movies are subjective. I think art and movies can exist outside of people's perceptions, and whether they recognize whether a movie is good or not doesn't mean the movie isn't good, or it doesn't mean the movie's bad. I think people's taste is subjective, but I think that there absolutely is inherent objective greatness in films. Whether the audience recognizes it or not, that's up to the audience. But I do think, look, you look at a list of the AFI 100 greatest movies, there is a consensus, and when I think a certain critical mass of consensus is reached, that it's pretty apparent that there are certain films that, whether you want to call them that or not, are considered perfect. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't. I think Citizen Kane is a perfect film. There's a lot of people that just can't buy into it, or they find it boring or whatever. That's their issue. But I think obviously that it stood the test of time. And same with something like Hitchcock's Vertigo. A lot of people, especially modern audiences, have a real hard time buying into the anachronistic nature of the way movies were made, 60 or 70 years ago. And I don't think that's a function of the film. I think that's just, you have to take into consideration where we've moved and where we've come to as a culture and things like that. I mean, first of all, the real point is that you have movies that you love. It doesn't matter whether they're perfect. It doesn't matter whether anybody else likes them. All that matters is, do you like them? Do they provide you enjoyment? I mean, at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. It's always fun. We always want lists, and we always want to quantify things, and I fall into that too. I'm like, as soon as I read, what are your 5 perfect movies? I want to be like, oh my God, I'm going to put that on Twitter. I did not answer that question, because there's more movies. Look, I would say that the extended version, the untitled version of Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous is a perfect movie. There's a lot of people that don't like that, but for me, I could watch that movie every time I turn that movie on. I love it. And I probably love it more each time I see it, because I can anticipate my favorite scenes, and there's just so much about that movie that speaks to me. But there's a lot of people that, hey, that movie means nothing to them. But and that's what's really important, is that we do have movies that entertain us and that we love. And isn't that why we're here? Isn't that why we're imagination connoisseurs? Isn't that why we're members of the Post-Geek Singularity? Because we love movies. We love other things, video games, books, music, comics, novels, television, whatever. But still, so there you go. Before I get to today's bill of fare, the thing I want to talk about, there's a number of things I would like to jump back to, because there's people's tips and super chats I have not been able to read. So I want to go back a couple of days. For instance, Willow asked me 2 days ago, in response to the last episode of Robservations, episode number 397, what did you think of the Simpsons movie? At least Disney didn't censor the nude skateboard scene. Yeah, that's some crazy. I don't understand any of that. I really don't. I liked it. I mean, I thought the Simpsons movie was good. I enjoyed it. It was funny. It's funny because I have seen, that was like the last time I after the first 5 years of Simpsons, the Simpsons movie, I don't remember when that actually came out off the top of my head, but that was the last. After that, it was the last time I ever actually really sat down and watched Simpsons from beginning to end. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. You know, I enjoyed. People forget we had like the Beavis and Butthead movie. We had the Simpsons movie. It's pretty amazing that they made these films. And I like the Simpsons movie. Senior Ashish says, do you think there'll be longer first runs and home video windows for certain films, e.g. Tenet opens in July, and states that allow theaters to reopen and runs for 8 to 12 months or longer to accommodate all state reopenings with no home release till fall 2021 or later? Well, Senor, I'll tell you something. You know, when I was a kid, a lot of movies opened regionally. You'd have a movie like, say, Halloween or a Maniac or Dawn of the Dead. Those were films that would open in big cities first, and then it would take sometimes 2 years before they played all across America and indeed the world. So, I mean, I remember I lost in a Schmoedown. I challenged it, but I got it back. Like Superman 2 opened in Australia, I want to say in December of 1980 or something, and then it didn't open in America until June of 1981. And of course the reverse is often true in places like Japan, when movies open here and they don't show up in Japan until 6 months later. So I could see something like that happening, that they would hold off on the theatrical release windows. We're going to see what happens. I mean, let's hope people don't start sticking ultraviolet lights down their throats or drinking Lysol, and they'll still be around to go to movies, but who knows? I think it's interesting. They could go back to that model. Unfortunately, I don't think that's helpful in terms of getting back the investment money that studios need. I mean, that's what they need, those big dollars on these big budget movies coming in. Luckily, Tenet hasn't affected the studio, whereas other movies have. I mean, when you push a movie a year, it's really problematic for a studio in terms of the interest rates they're paying on that borrowed money. But Tenet so far was never taken off its date, and hopefully we will see it open in July, because man, I can't wait to see it. And who knows? But then we've got Wonder Woman 84 opening still in July. They moved its release date to July, so Warner Brothers could have quite a good summer. And John Campy and I have been talking about whether or not movies can make $1 billion in this time, and we'll see. It's going to be really interesting to see where we are at in a couple of months from now. I mean, we're creeping up on May. Tenet's supposed to open in 2.5 months, but a lot can happen. I mean, who would have thought 2.5 months ago we'd be where we are right now? So 2.5 months can be quite a long time. We'll see what happens. I hope everyone continues to stay safe and shelters at home and exhibits behavior that will not lead to tragedy. So I would like to see that happen, to be honest. DC Marvel sent in a super chat and said, "Hey Rob, HBO Max is not available in Canada. How is that fair? I hate how we are in North America and we still get ignored." Well, don't worry. We don't get HBO Max right away either. So don't worry, DC Marvel. You will get HBO Max soon enough, because I want it too. Star Wars Rocks also sent in a tip and said, "Hi Rob. I was just wondering if you would call Voltron the Legendary Defender an anime or a fully 3D animated cartoon, as its original language is English." You know, that's a good question. I think anything that's anime has to be Japanese, or maybe Asian, but I think Japanese, and it has to be Japanese. It has to come from Japan to be considered that. But you know, on the other hand, it pretty much is anime. I mean, come on. You know, it's Voltron. I think Bandai made a Voltron, a Soul Chogokin Voltron, so there's an argument that can be made. But I do think anime has a certain Japanese sensibility. Willow sends in a tip and she says, "Hopefully third time's the charm." Well, Willow, I hope third time's the charm too. We shall see. Dark Helmet sends in a very nice super chat. Thank you, Dark Helmet. I appreciate that. "Hey Rob, my very first movie experience was the 1989 Batman. I was completely blown away. As many people know, I, of course, was at the world premiere of Tim Burton's Batman in Westwood. I sat in the same row as Jack Nicholson. What a day that was. I mean, people, the anticipation for that movie was bananas, and for you to have had that as your first film-going experience, I envy you, sir. What must that have been like? Only Avengers, Dark Knight, and Endgame have come close to replicating that feeling. What movie did that for you? Thanks for all you do. Well, you know, I have to say the movie that I anticipated, like I loved movies as a kid. And my parents took me to, when I was obviously younger, I went and saw the Disney live action movies like The Apple Dumpling Gang and Herbie Goes Bananas, or Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo, or Herbie the Love Bug, or Herbie, whatever. All the Disney live action films I would go see. And the first movie that I remember really anticipating that I was aware of commercials was Logan's Run. I was 9. And I saw Logan's Run at the John Dan Cinema, the same cinema that I later saw Superman the movie and Star Trek the Motion Picture. And it was this Spy Who Loved Me. It was a gigantic theater in Bellevue, Washington. And it was the flagship theater for the SRO, the Sterling Recreation Organization, that John Dance, I guess, founded or was president of. So it was his namesake theater. And I wanted to see Logan's Run because it was science fiction. And by 9, I would watch any science fiction movie ever. I was fanatical, whether I didn't care. And Logan's Run was, I was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs to see Logan's Run. I couldn't wait. And then a year later, Star Wars came out, and that too. I mean, Star Wars, you know, I would probably say that, you know, I've often told this story that my dad was taking, I want to say it was Friday after school or something, or I don't know why, but my memory of it was during the week, because Star Wars opened on, I believe, a Wednesday. And my dad took me and my friend, his name was Gardner Morelli. And he's the only person I've ever met whose first name was Gardner Morelli. And he, even to this day, you hung out around Gardner Morelli, you could not help but smile. He always had a smile on his face. He was always laughing. He was like the happiest kid in the world. And he had a younger brother, and his parents, his dad's name was Pamphlo Morelli. And he had his mom, and she would always say, Gardy! And we'd always have Indian guides in his basement in his house. It was great. So my dad took Gardner Morelli and I to see Star Wars. And I'd never heard of lines around a theater in my lifetime where you couldn't get in. He took us down to the UA 150 theater, where I ended up seeing Empire Strikes Back 26 times. And there was a line around the block. And I was like completely dejected because Star Wars was the movie that was obviously made for me. So I didn't know anyone even cared, but apparently lots of people cared because the line was huge all the way around up 6th and Blanchard, around the corner up into 7th. Oh my God, it was insane. Or not 7th, it was up to 5th. Around the block, that huge block, where now, by the way, the Amazon headquarters is on that same street where the UA 150 theater used to be. They blew it up. Those, God damn them all to hell. They blew it up. But anyway, so that was, I didn't get in. So my dad took me and Gardner Morelli to see a double feature, which was, for a while, for one day I didn't care, because we went and saw The Car and Race with the Devil as a double feature at the Coliseum Theater. My dad went to work because he worked up the street, the Seafirst building. Oh my God. And then the next day, or 2 days later, I went with my neighbors across the street, the Chambers, Mr. and Mrs. Chambers, Peter, and Emily, and we went and saw Star Wars, and I was like, no, we have to get there hours early, and so we did. And I would have to say that sitting in the theater seeing Star Wars for the first time, and I've said this a million times on the show, but there was nothing remotely similar ever in the history of humanity that was similar to Star Wars, and seeing that movie when I was 10 years old was one of the most transcendent moments of my life. I mean, it was it was a movie that really made me want to make movies, want to work in entertainment. I couldn't believe that, because until then, you know, you had 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Trek and Forbidden Planet, but there was nothing like Star Wars, that whole lived-in future, the fact that there was peak verisimilitude in that film. It was unbelievable. And sitting there, what was really funny is I can remember what it was like. You know, John Williams' score came on. No one had ever heard anything like that. I mean, you can tell me, okay, Korngold score for King's Road, but it wasn't it wasn't presented the way it was in Star Wars. I mean, that smash in of the Star Wars theme. And what was amazing was hearing, I'll never forget this, everybody in the theater was whispering under the breath, "It is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships striking from hidden base have won their first victory over the evil Galactic Empire." I mean, it was like Princess Leia, custodian of soul implants, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was amazing. The entire theater was reading aloud, and I don't even think they knew it. And I was reading aloud. It was amazing. It was amazing. Seeing Star Wars for the first time was amazing, and nobody had seen it. I mean, I was still, no kids I had known, none of the kids, because it was the weekend. So it was Monday, every kid came back and saw it, but it was unbelievable. So that was probably the most amazing, I should probably click into this, the most amazing experience I had. Fortunato Montresor sends in a tip and says, ultraviolet delights have ultraviolet ends. I like that. Yeah, man, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can go into a tanning bed and it works from the inside out like a microwave. What no man can say. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, some movie pundits and critics have gaps in which classic movies and TV shows Some movie pundits and critics have gaps in which classic movies and TV shows they've seen. We convinced you to watch The Sound of Music. Now you can help convince Harloff to watch The Thing and Bibiani to watch the Shogun miniseries. You know, it's interesting. I'm older. So when The Thing came out, the summer of 82, first of all, Harloff, and I love Christian Harloff, he's an idiot for not having watched The Thing. How can you not want? It's one thing, like, you love Star Wars. I mean, The Thing is of the same ilk. You know, I don't understand. The Thing is a classic film. It was one of the great pantheon of movies that came out in 1982 in that summer. I mean, within a few weeks, we got Conan the Barbarian, Tron, The Road Warrior, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, Poltergeist, E.T., Blade Runner. I mean, and John Carpenter's The Thing, all in a couple of weeks. And it's weird to me that somebody hasn't seen The Thing because it is such a classic film. Now, I can understand why when people are growing up, they might not be interested in something like the Shogun miniseries. But it falls in the cracks. But I don't understand when something is that good. When you know something is that good, to go back, or people have cited how good it is, to go back and watch it. But I get it. I mean, Shogun, you've got so many things you want to watch, so many foreign films, so much film history. And this is true of Harloff. I don't think Harloff is really an idiot, by the way. I love Christian. He's great, and I love what they've done with the Schmodown. I'm very fortunate that I'm still a part of it. So no, but I don't understand not watching The Thing. But yeah, everybody's got their holes, because remember, there's so much, and I can't criticize anyone who's younger than me because there's exponentially more to watch after every year that goes by. Swack Props says, Cal says, a modern example of a perfect movie for me is The Martian. I can never get tired of watching it. Swack Props, I am right there with you, sir, and I love the extended version of it. I love The Martian. There is nothing about that movie that fails to entertain. And what's really interesting is I love everything about it. Even when we go back to Earth, like I've often said, I want those characters. I want to make a movie, or I'd love a series about that entire group at NASA. I love it. Donald Glover. I love everything about The Martian. There's not a moment in The Martian that I don't love, which I think is amazing. Dirty Nerdy says, Lorraine fell in love with Marty. Her dad hit him with the car. He had dinner at her house, caused a skateboarding scene, and stood up to the school bully. He played the guitar on stage and wrecked the town square. Who's not going to remember Marty or Calvin? Look, you can remember him, but do you know what he looks like? I remember people that that had an indelible impression on me in my life. I was really, really, really good friends with a guy named Jimmy Fiddler. I even went and visited him. I spent a month in South Carolina when I was younger. If he walked up to me, and the last time I saw him was 7th grade, if he walked up to me right now, he was a guy that I spent every day with, and walked up to me and looked at me and said, hey, I'm Jimmy Fiddler, I have no idea what he would look like as an adult. No idea. And the fact that Marty, their own son, I don't think that they would remember. That's not how memory works. I mean, I've lived in the real world enough to know that I've met people in this business that I have no recollection of meeting, and they walk up to me and talk to me and tell me something. They tell me about a time we met at Comic-Con, or a party we were at, and a time we got drunk, or a time we went and did this, or I was friends with the friends, and I've hung out with this person before. No memory. Because the thing is, it's not like they were there, like Bob Gale says. They're not there at every moment. I just don't think that's true. In my own experience of the world, I still don't buy Dirty Nerdy that people would remember. Especially, you're not going to look at your own kid. Your mind of your own child is from the time that they were born. You've watched them evolve right in front of you, and you're never going to make in your mind is never going to make you think, oh, why would you think that Marty, if you've watched your own child grow up from birth, why would you ever equate him to being somebody you met 20 years ago? The logic, your mind would never make that leap. I just don't think. Esteban. Man, I love the name Esteban. Esteban Cartin sends in a super chat and says, hello, Rob. Greetings from Costa Rica. Have you ever read or seen The Outsider? If you have, what are your thoughts? I have not finished the show, and I did read the book. Here's what I thought about The Outsider. I thought it was really, really, really intriguing. The story was really intriguing, but to be honest, the supernatural turn the story took, I didn't buy it. And I love Stephen King. And what was really interesting to me is when I was and I haven't got up, I've watched the first 5 episodes of The Outsider, and I haven't got to the end, but I really the twist again on the show was so realistic, and it had such verisimilitude that I was really waiting to see would I buy into the twist, even though I knew it was coming. I just didn't do it. I didn't buy it. It was such an intriguing mystery, but then it makes the swerve it makes into the supernatural realm. I'm like, okay, but it just didn't work for me. And that has been sort of true of a lot of Stephen King books of late. I mean, I think I love Stephen King. I buy all of his books. I think the last book that I read of his that I really loved was Revival. I don't know why. A lot of people didn't like Revival as much as I did, but I really loved Revival. But the show, my God, the show is unbelievably well made. And that's another thing. I need to get to the end of it. And maybe that was kind of why I stopped, because you get to a point and you're like, I don't know. I mean, I knew it was coming, and in a way, I kind of should have stuck with it. But it sure is really well made. I will say that for it. Nay sends in a super chat and says, in Star Wars A New Hope, did it bother you? It showed the English Roman alphabet on the Death Star tractor beam when Obi-Wan shut it down. Every other time, they use galactic basic alphabet. You know what? As a Star Trek fan from way back, that kind of stuff never bothered me, because I just assumed, like, why are they speaking English? There are things as a film fan that you have to just go with. One of those things is language. I loved in Hunt for Red October, it has that great moment where you see the political officer, and he's speaking English, or he's speaking Russian, and then the camera pushes in, and the word Armageddon is the first English language word we hear, and then it comes back, and he's the rest of the time the Russian crew is speaking English. I thought that was a great way to deal with that. And so whenever I've seen English or hear people speaking in English, like in the Star Wars universe, why would they speak English? I mean, none of that makes any sense. So I've always been able to leap beyond that, so it's never bothered me. I mean, Arabic, they come back, and I know they've added the Arabic language, or the letters and things, and that's fine. I think that's great, although, it's just that kind of stuff never bothers me in movies. That doesn't mean it doesn't have to bother you. I know a lot of people that would be bothered by something like that. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I watched a few episodes of The Persuaders with Roger Moore and Tony Curtis. It's the definition of style over substance. It had a great soundtrack, great costume design, and 2 very charismatic leads. Unfortunately, it has no interesting plot whatsoever. Yeah, The Persuaders was never that great. I don't know if I really like Roger Moore and Tony Curtis together either. Anyway, but now before I get to letters and everything, let me jump over and talk about what I was going to make today's topic, or what I am going to make today's topic about, which is where we were at in terms of movie theaters. Now, today, in the Hollywood Reporter, there is an article, and it is basically an analyst says theatrical film, TV ads, pay TV are doomed by COVID-19 to fade out like CDs, DVDs, and print. an analyst. An analyst says is saying there is going to be doom for all of these things, and this was in Deadline today. Dade Hayes says this. He wrote this, and it was published today at 8:42 a.m. The damage done to Hollywood by COVID-19 is just beginning. It is just beginning, and will hasten the decline of theatrical moviegoing, TV advertising, pay TV, and other longtime features of the landscape, according to a sweeping new report by Wall Street analyst Michael Nathanson. The analyst at MoffettNathanson reflected in the 25-page report on fallout from previous recessions over his 20-plus years as an analyst. He noted the demise of the CD, the DVD, the radio ad growth, and print ads all resulted from economic crises. Economic recessions act as an accelerant for evolving shifts in consumer and corporate behavior. He wrote, when facing unplanned declines in revenue, spending decisions have to be quickly re-examined as individuals and corporations reassess the relative money for value hierarchies in their world. As 2020 began, Nathanson had noted some cracks in the fundamental pillars of media. Given the ravages of the pandemic and the resulting changes in business norms and consumer behavior, especially a permanent shift to streaming, when this is all done, the top streaming platforms, Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, will emerge with the lion's share of scripted content creation, the analyst wrote. There will likely be fewer movie screens in the U.S., even fewer DVDs purchased, and thus fewer films made for those long optimized and windowed release cycles. In essence, those studios with SVOD platforms will have to move more quickly to accelerate their pay-one windows, which will harm the economics of other studios without such advantages. Unlike some doomsday prophets, Nathanson emphasized that as a self-described cinephile, he is neither hoping or expecting that consumers will abandon theaters en masse. We are saying that as the return on investment in the industry shrinks, studios will limit their investment in traditional theatrical releases. The report did not find Nathanson changing any of his ratings on media and entertainment shares. He reiterated his buy ratings on Disney and Fox. We believe Disney is the only company with a big enough lifeboat and the organizational will to come out of these secular changes in a strong position, while Fox's focus on live news and sports remains the right strategy, he wrote. AMC Networks, Discovery, and Viacom CBS are rated neutral because those current valuations will be supported by near-term cash flow yields. He also lists Cinemark and Netflix as neutral. The pay TV bundle, already in decline, will see an increasing decline in customers. The price of the traditional bundle will have to rise in the coming years, which will push more non-sports fans out of pay TV, Nathanson wrote. Advertising on traditional TV, which has remained intact despite large declines in viewing, has been due for a shakeout in the view of Nathanson and other analysts. Unfortunately, that time is now, and we are expecting to see major cuts in TV ad spends over the next few quarters, he wrote. In the midterm, the shifts in consumer behavior towards streaming should move more ad spends to AVOD platforms like Roku, Pluto, and Peacock, or SVOD hybrids like Hulu and CBS All Access. Ad dollars spent on linear TV ads in the future will be focused on live sports that will continue to offer relative efficient reach and news that deliver a constant flow of older Americans for healthcare, financial, and auto advertisers. In addition, networks that target endemic categories like the Food Network or HDTV will be relatively better off than networks that focus on general entertainment, given brand safety concerns and an absence of premium content. Blah, 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 blah. Yes, I understand. Okay, you guys get it. Here's the thing. The entertainment business has been in a state of flux for a long time. We have seen the declines of physical media. Every year it's dropping 15 to 20%, sometimes even more. My beloved physical media is going to, once again, become a niche market like the Laserdisc market was. That's what's happening. When you have Disney Plus, when parents can go get Disney Plus, they're never going to buy physical media of Disney's product ever again. Why would you? Even I'm hard pressed. I mean, I feel like I'm obligated to have got the Star Wars Skywalker Saga box set only because I've been buying Star Wars since almost 40 years now. Buying different versions of Star Wars. I'm like, this is going to be the last version I ever have to buy of the Star Wars Skywalker Saga. It's in 4K, and from now on, it's always going to be streaming, whatever else they do with it. For me, physical media is habitual. I buy it as habit. It seems like, there's very little I spend my disposable income on. Not that I have any disposable income anymore at all. but it's always been the same: books, movies, action figures, or model kits. That's it. Those are the only things I don't particularly spend lots of money on clothes or shoes, or except T-shirts. I like my geeky T-shirts. That's about it. I'm not buying Picassos. I don't own a supercar. And the things that I like, I've liked my whole life. So it's, action figures have gotten more expensive. But physical media, now that there's a one-stop shop, even I'm looking at my entire beautiful 4K Marvel Cinematic Universe discs that I love seeing up on the shelf, and I think to myself, will I ever take those out again and watch them? There's more special features on the Endgame presentation on Disney, and even the Star Wars movies aren't in Dolby Vision. You can get them in Dolby Vision on Disney Plus, and I'm like, okay. And do I watch these movies? Sure. If you have a thunderous surround sound, if you have a thunderous home theater system, let me tell you, physical media is the way to go. It's better than streaming. It's better than streaming. But for how long? And if you don't have a thunderous home theater system, are you going to bother? So the landscape is changing. It's changing. It's altering. And I think in my lifetime, what we're seeing, we're gonna have like 4 or 5 or 6 giant streaming services, and maybe niche streaming services like the Criterion Channel, because a lot of the Criterion movies are not they're not gonna be playing as well on Netflix, so people will go to Criterion to see the world cinema or classic cinema the way Criterion will present it. But for the most part, I really see that these streaming services are going to be the final destination that really began in the late 70s with the advent of home entertainment, with home theater and home being able to go get movies. Well, now the studios, the way it's shaking out, Disney, Universal, Warner Brothers, even Paramount and CBS, you're going to have these studios that now have their own streaming services. So basically, they've got the back catalog of that studio's movies, and they have all of the TV shows and everything that those studios were responsible for in one place. So yes, what he was pointing out here is true. Ad revenue is going to shake out. Sporting events, news, late night talk shows, those kinds of things are always going to support ads. But they're ephemeral. They're in one day and out the next. They come and they go. And I completely understand that. But will movie theaters go away? I don't think so. I think people want to go back to movie theaters. I think going to the movie theaters still provide a magic. And I just think people still love movies. Yes, will a lot of people just stay home and watch films? Yeah, and I'll tell you this. As more and more people grow up with streaming, and they feel less and less a need to go to theaters. Look at how quickly file sharing supplanted buying CDs. Like I loved having CDs. I liked having a collection on the wall. That is no longer true. That completely, a whole generation of people were born and grew up in a world of file sharing. They feel no need to own CDs, and I don't blame them. I have had many people, especially when I was over at Collider all the time. People would be like, putting discs in machines is so 20th century. And they're right. It is 20th century. File sharing, Plex servers, whatever. There's physical media. I still like it because the technology is not there. I cannot get the exact same experience that I can get off of a physical media disc that I can get off streaming. It's better with physical media, but that's not always going to be the case. And when that changes, the one thing about movies and collecting movies is that you can watch what you want when you want. And that's what I like. But even then, how many movies is too many movies? I probably have somewhere around 3,000 discs. I know people that have 20,000 discs. My discs are at least somewhat curated. There was a point when I was buying everything. I stopped doing that. I only bought movies that were significant to me in some way, shape, or form. And while I'll buy new movies and I'll replace versions I've had with new versions, how long is that going to last? I stopped buying comic books. I bought comic books for 30 years, and one day I just stopped. I stopped buying weekly comics. I just bought omnibuses. I would follow the news, what came out, but so things change. But I don't think movie theaters will go away, because the presentation, when you go to a Dolby Cinema, for instance, or you go to laser projected IMAX, that is a singular experience that cannot be recreated in most people's homes. And I think when you go see a big theatrical release, when you go see a family, depending on how expensive it is, or I just think going to the movie theaters is a collective experience that you can have together with other people. It's communal, and we are communal people. We want to have those experiences, and I don't think they are going to go away anytime soon. The business that supports these things is going to change. Physical media is going to go away. It just is. And the idea of collecting movies eventually will be bred out of us. As sure, young people are always going to want to collect something. It's part of being young. And as you get older, as you get closer to the great beyond, you want to get rid of all these things. You can't take them with you. It's not like we're all Egyptians. No one's going to build me a pyramid and put my Star Trek models and action figures and whatever and comics in there with me. Maybe my silver boxed Dawn of the Dead Laserdisc can be buried with me, but for the most part, we're not doing that, and we want to get rid of all of our stuff. So I think stuff in general, collectibles, things, it's just going to be more convenient, more easy, but it's still more fun to go to the movie theaters and see films. I will always believe that, because especially living in Los Angeles, Thursday nights at specific theaters, it's an event, and you want to experience that event. And I don't think they're going to go away. Now, to follow that up, French cinema chain boss says July reopening for movie theaters is unrealistic and theaters should wait until movie-going is not a frightening experience. This was also on Deadline today, written by Tom Grader. It was published at 8 o'clock this morning. Nathaniel Karmitz, the CEO at Paris-based MK2, which operates the biggest art house cinema network in France, is preaching patience for the reopening of theaters. Speaking to Deadline, Karmitz said that a mid-July opening, which has been bandied about around Europe in the last 2 weeks, initially as a provisional timeline by the International Union of Cinemas, was unlikely. Right now, to have a projection in July, I think it's not realistic. The MK2 boss commented, "We can say we want to open. We want people to come back. We all want to have a drink with our friends and go back to the movies, especially in France." One of the things that I loved when I was first in France, the first time I actually was a guest of honor at the first Star Trek convention in Paris back in the early aughts. Wandering around Paris, I was surprised you'd go around the corner and there'd be some art house cinema showing Casablanca. It was the greatest thing ever. Paris might be the greatest movie-going city in the world. I've only been there twice, so maybe I'm wrong, but it's amazing. I loved it. And cinema is such a great part of French culture. But today, no one is able to give a serious date for that. We still don't know how people are going to go back to school, to work. It's question after question. We can speculate, but there's no realistic way to talk about this. The Paris-based group also owns the Censure chain in Spain across its sites in the two countries. It clocks 9.5 million admissions per year. 9.5 million people go to the movies in Spain and France. Karmitz highlighted Spain as an indicator of how long the process of safely reopening could realistically take. Spain won't see cinemas open before Q4, October or November, Karmitz said, referencing the recent comments made by the country's Minister of Labor and Social Economy, Yolanda Diaz, in a televised address, which she said that the tourism, culture, and leisure sectors will not return until the end of the year. "I think everyone is working on late November and early December," he added, on Spain. For Karmitz, however, the question of how cinemas can be reopened in a way that attracts audiences is more pressing than trying to set a date. "Our question is not when to reopen, it is how to reopen. If it has to be with masks, 2x2 social distancing, with further restrictions, our belief is that it isn't worth opening and we should wait," he stated. "We think we should wait until it's a good experience and not a frightening experience. Opening without good conditions doesn't make sense for us. Those conditions also include having strong content available. One of the reasons the mid-July date is being mooted in Europe alongside its following U.S. change announcing they are aiming to open the doors in July is that the next major blockbuster still sticking with its original date is Warner Brothers' Christopher Nolan pick Tenet, which is set for July 15th through 17th in most markets at the time of this writing. We need strong movies to reopen, Karmitz asserts. Even if the Nolan pick holds, which Warner's is insisting it will, there are holes in the calendar after all the date shifting that has happened already. The MK2 CEO says that discussions are now happening in France about how to fill slots once theaters are open. He believes that there will be roughly a 2-week period after that point before distributors have the confidence to release big movies. France may be in a more enviable position than most territories, however, with a healthy supply of local films on the calendar, which regularly do good business at the box office. We have very strong French lineup to come, so we're not worried, he adds. Ultimately, Karmitz notes that the company will follow what the government says. Today it was announced that the country will wait until the end of May to declare when restaurants can reopen, and a date for cinemas will likely come later still. He notes the situation in France is less worrying than elsewhere, as there's a good level of assistance from the French government in place to keep businesses running, meaning cinemas can afford to wait for the right time. My way of living with crisis is to live day by day. We have different scenarios in how we can reopen depending on the dates, he adds. Right now, we just don't know. The wider MK2 company is riding out the pandemic with its sales side busy locking deals on extensive library, which consists of more than 800 titles, including numerous classics. This week, the company announced a deal with Netflix that will see the service stream a selection of titles, including Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times and Francois Truffaut's Jules and Jim, in French-speaking territories throughout 2020. Also this week, MK2 brought veteran French producer Rosalie Varda on board as an advisor for the catalog. The outfit has been looking for innovative ways to keep people entertained during the lockdown, including creating a short film confined contest and launching an online platform through its magazine. I can't even pronounce this. Tricolor, I guess, Three-Color, which is hosting 5 films, strange and rare titles from the archive to watch free per week. So there you go. I mean, I think the point that he makes that is the most salient point here is that going to the movies should not be a scary experience. And I agree with him. I don't necessarily... Look, I'm not going to lie. I don't care if I have to wear a mask to go see Tenet. I'm going to go see that movie in IMAX on Hollywood Boulevard at the Chinese Theater if I can. If not, I'll go see it at the Cinerama, but I want to see that shit in IMAX because you know Christopher Nolan shot most of it, if not all of it, in IMAX. I want to see it in the thunderous Chinese theater with that laser projection and the speakers that rattle my molars. And I will go if I have to wear a mask. But the problem is that diminishes the whole experience. Although maybe it's kind of fun. But you can't see the smile on people's faces afterwards when they see some amazing work in the cinema. And that, my friends, is kind of a bummer. Anyway, I got letters. I got back. You know what? I'm just going to zip around with a bunch of different letters that I have, and I'm going to see what I've got here, because I've got letters from people who've never written me letters before. This letter comes from Scott D. Hello, Rob. I asked you about this news story a while back and was wondering if you've heard anything about it. I love the old Quatermass and the Pit movie as a kid. It perfectly embraced the subtle terror and dread a movie of its type and era could. The story in January of 2019 was legendary, was developing a new movie for that character. I would love to see his character in that kind of scientific detective story with an interesting lead like Quatermass be updated to the modern style of filmmaking, be it done as a period piece or updated in the modern day. Have you heard anything more about this project? Or if not, are there people that you can reach out to dig a little on this for some news, as it's been over a year and no word? Thanks for everything you do, Rob. Well, Scott D., I've talked about the Quatermass movies, Quatermass 2, Quatermass in the Pit. I am a huge fan of the Quatermass TV miniseries from, 1980. I love the Quatermass movies. I'm a huge fan of that whole scientific exploration genre. One of the reasons I love the X-Files so much. I have not heard anything more about this film, and it bums me out. I would so much love to see a new Quatermass movie. I think that would be dope, especially with modern technology. It's the way to do great, big science fiction and horror without spending a lot of money if you know what you're doing. So the Quatermass films, which I dearly love, I hope that we see another Quatermass movie. This next letter comes from Crosstalk up in Edmonton. Hey, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity from the Great White North again up here in Edmonton. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this crisis. On to the topic at hand that I've been thinking about writing in for a while now. Cyberpunk. So, cyberpunk is probably one, if not my favorite genre to explore. There's so much you can say with regards to our world in a setting that is familiar but alien enough to distance people from uncomfortable ideas. In many ways, it's the renegade cousin to standard science fiction. It's that one cousin that always listened to garage punk and synthwave, somehow liking both, while dressing in studded-out leather jackets full of patches and bands you've never heard of. I love that. I love that description of cyberpunk. It's that cousin that you don't know what he does for work, but always has the newest gadgets and is up on all the latest pop culture references, texts, and trends. He likes Star Wars, sure, but his favorite character is IG-88 or Boba Fett. He likes Trek, but thinks it's unrealistic. There's no grime in Star Trek, and he lives in grime. In fact, he thinks all of us do. We just don't see it. He's the fiercely libertarian family member that can derail a Thanksgiving dinner in 30 seconds flat by dismantling Aunt Karen's pseudoscience about vaccines, even though his mom explicitly told him not to start anything. He's a provocateur by nature and loves to wield that ability like a sledgehammer. But above all, he does one thing: make us actually consider where we're going as the human race. What a dope description of cyberpunk, Crosstalk. I love it. Cyberpunk has a special place in my heart and has actually in a large way shaped the way I look at the world. Whether you attribute it to postmodernist nihilism or the slow decline and dismantling of the middle class, authors like Philip K. Dick with Electric Sheep or 77's 2000 AD Dread or Gibson's Neuromancer have tackled this subject in a compelling and endlessly fascinating manner. The idea of cyberpunk to me is essentially this: at what point does our humanity and empathy disappear behind a wall of technological advancement? Does the advancement of tech fundamentally change us and make us less empathetic to the plights of our fellow humans? Most of this genre plants itself firmly in the despondent and gloomy column of that argument where Trek stands for our optimism through scientific elevation. So, as a generally positive person, why would I love this genre so much, you may ask? Why would I prefer this genre over something with more future-forward comforts? Well, I think it's because in my lifetime I've seen and experienced more to conclude that a cyberpunk dystopia is a more likely path of where we are headed than the unity experienced in Trek. Don't get me wrong. I really hope we shift gears and start driving towards the future that Trek shows us, as I would very much prefer our future descendants end up in that landscape. The picture painted by cyberpunk is, in many ways, the antithesis of Trek. Technology is used to exploit, steal, or more efficiently commit crimes and murder in cyberpunk. Technology in Trek is used to explore, advance, and heal. I realize there are exceptions to both of these generally agreed upon tropes in both styles of futurism, but those are the broad themes. I have worked for and been subsequently fired by several huge tech and telecom companies in my life. In every single one, I have witnessed abuses of data, privacy, and finances, among a litany of other ways to cut corners through exploitation of employees, customers, and even the law. Playing the system doesn't work. I've lost jobs for bringing abuses to light through internal processes. I don't have much hope or faith in humanity as a whole, but put my energy and effort towards my hope in people. The better our education and more accurate our information of the world around us tends to make people at least aware of how actions affect others to minimize the detrimental parts of these decisions. At least I think that should be the goal of our societal education systems. The human abuses we've inflicted on one another is unacceptable, and I think to bring that information to the forefront keeps it in sight and in mind. I'm against the tearing down of racially charged monuments or heritage-based ideas. The reason for this is because once it's out of sight, it is out of mind. How many kids these days ask their parents, "Hey Dad, can we go see the Third Reich and Civil War monuments in the basement of the museum, and you can tell me about why it's important we remember such things?" I'll give you a hint. It's less than one. And I think cyberpunk scratches that itch. It's the world we have if we forget those historical atrocities because we are distracted by so much technological advancement to realize that to be human means we are not just aware, but educated about those past failures of the human race. Or it could just be because I'm a provocateur at heart and simply like stirring the shit and cyberpunk looks awesome. Either way, I think it's worth delving into, don't you? As always, Rob and my fellow imagination connoisseurs in the Post-Geek Singularity, much love from your hat to the north. Take off, hosers. Once again, Crosstalk, what a thoughtful, interesting letter you have sent in. I I don't think that Star Trek and cyberpunk are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that, again, our world evolves into the world that we see in Star Trek in the 23rd and 24th centuries. I think a spacefaring race is inherently dealing with other issues than, say, cyberpunk is. I mean, I think the real problem with our time, and anybody who reads lots of science fiction, and yes, I read Neuromancer when it came out in 1984. I am a huge fan of the cyberpunk genre. But to me, cyberpunk is just, it represents our technological. Cyberpunk is extrapolating about where we're at now as a culture and where we're at as a people and where our future is going. So I see cyberpunk as one of the most relevant subcategories of science fiction. I mean, I really do. And I think it has more to say about the human race than most parts of science fiction. I mean, whether it's when you're dealing with transhumanism, physically altering our bodies. I mean, cyberpunk deals with all of those things in addition to technology. I think it just speaks to me. It absolutely does. I loved your description. I'm a huge fan. Again, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash is one of my favorite books of all time. I love that book. I love the future it portrays. It's so imaginative. And I think really, you know, one of the things that I like about cyberpunk is it's inherently about smart people. You know, to be a hacker or to be hacking, whether you're hacking the genetic code or you're hacking into a system, you have to be smart. And I've always liked Star Trek is also about smart people. And I think our future is, it kills me that we don't focus on science. It kills me when I watch the President of the United States talk about using Lysol to, and by the way, he did not say this. I watched that press conference live. And you're asking yourself, I mean, science, you're watching me on technologically based, there's so much science that is involved in just me, like just what I'm sitting in front of right now. It represents what really, really smart people can come up with when they are well-funded and they're working with other really smart people. The future of humanity is built by smart, educated people. It always has been. It's not a class issue. You know, there's a lot of people, a lot of upper class people have put down others. You know, smart people have always sort of challenged the status quo. But let me tell you, there is no future in being dumb. There's no future in being ignorant. And that's why I like cyberpunk as a genre. It celebrates people that are really, really smart. And I like that. And I always like that. So I, too, love cyberpunk. And I like the whole aesthetic. It's very cool. David Lutz writes in and says, this is a duplicate to eyesonthewire@gmail.com, a built-in redundancy to make sure one of these gets to you. In case of doubling, please disregard. That's okay. I do intend on writing future letters. My first will serve the simple function of sharing a link with the Post-Geek Singularity. This interview of Alex Garland, who made Devs, touches on Kubrick's 2001, Ex Machina, Devs, and the big underlying questions of artificial intelligence and simulation theory. Subjects that I find fascinating and thought might give insights worthwhile to fellow imagination connoisseurs and yourself. I also want to thank you for fostering, in my estimation, the most inclusive, intellectually stimulating, and authentic YouTube channel. Why, thank you very much. You've created a wonderful and welcoming community in today's world that's something to be proud of. Lastly, I know that anyone can send in super chats, but your genuinely excited reaction to my question regarding Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue Paprika during Elizaviews made my day. The Elizaviews Dark City episode. Below is the interview with Garland, and it's a little over an hour. I don't know if this is the one that I watched, but it's amazing. And I'm going to put it in the live chat. This is the interview with Alex Garland that is given to us by David Lutz. David Lutz did ask about Satoshi Kon. Satoshi Kon is the man behind such great Japanese animation as Perfect Blue, I believe Millennium Actress, Paprika, and of course Paranoia Agent. All things that I own. I mean, they finally put out Millennium Actress and Perfect Blue on Blu-ray. Oh, happy day. I don't know if they're going to put out, maybe they're going to put out Paranoia Agent. Maybe they already did. But I'm a huge fan. If you have not seen the work of Satoshi Kon, he passed away, sadly. But I highly recommend any of those movies. Perfect Blue, Paprika, and Paranoia Agent. really an incredible visionary in the animation world and in the Japanese animation world, and watch that stuff. It's so good. David, thanks for writing in. I'm glad you say that about this community. I think that has been the greatest byproduct. My favorite thing about me doing Robservations, the absolute favorite thing for what I have done here, and I would say, I don't know if I've accomplished it. I mean, I like to think of myself more as a lightning rod or a facilitator, but it's really you guys. It's everybody that watches this channel. It's all the people that interact with this channel. And look, I've been getting some really good videos from people to play on the 400th episode, which is of course on Monday, and I'm blown away. I'm blown away by all of you imagination connoisseurs and the letters people get. And that's, for me, I'm just celebrating. I'm just here to be like, hey, isn't this awesome? Because it is. And this community that we have is awesome because of the community. And I want to thank you for writing in. What a great letter you've had. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's see. Other people have been jumping in on the chats section here. So let me find out where I was. Where am I when it comes to this? I'm falling behind. Bob Koal sends in a tip and says, I define a perfect film as, if I was Lord of all movie making, I couldn't think of any way to improve the film. With more forgiving premises, I think there are more perfect comedies. Mad World, Dr. Strangelove, The In-Laws, Sleepers, etc. There are some pretty great comedies. I have the Criterion Blu-ray of It's a Mad World. That movie's a little tough for me to watch. I think it's a little over the top. But I think you're right. There's a lot of great comedies. I think Tootsie I would consider to be a perfect film. I think Arthur. I was talking about this on the John Campy show. I dearly love Arthur. And I dearly love Tootsie. I don't know if it was the time of life, but hey. Throg is Life sends in a tip and says, Harloff loses all cred. Growing up then, that movie was on every freaking day after the year 1984. It barely loses to Beastmaster by the great Don Coscarelli, one of the forgotten indie filmmakers with whom I met this past fall for Phantasm's 40th anniversary. I know Don. I know his wife, Shelley Coscarelli. Phantasm is one of my favorite movies of all time. Certainly one of my favorite horror films. It never gets old. And I'm glad you met him. He's such a nice man. And so is his wife. Just Plain Steve sends in a super chat and says, I asked you quite a while ago what some good model starships were, but I couldn't recall what you said, so I took a shot in the dark and ordered the XL edition of the 1701D from Eagle Moss. I hope I did well. Well, I guess it's a model. I think of models as models you have to build. Those Eagle Moss starships are pretty good. The XL versions, I really like them. I love their NX-01 and the Enterprise C, but I think they're good. The Eagle Moss ships, the big versions of them, they're good. I mean, they do, they're fun. You know what I like about those? Because they're like die cast, they're fun to just pick up. And I find on those XLs, you pick them up and you can't take them out of your hand. You just sit there and play with them for all afternoon. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, we are glad you are back. Can you give more details about the 400th? Will you also do a Whining That Day and the John Campy show? The live chat needs this info. I will be doing the John Campy show on Monday. I'm going to start the 400th show at noon. It's going to be at noon. I think I have like 25 viewer videos to play, and I've got 5 long form videos to play. I don't know how long the interviews are going to be. All the interviews I did, Barbara Crampton, Melinda Snodgrass, Brian Fuller's was a 90-minute interview. Bill Sienkiewicz was a 2-hour interview. Melinda Snodgrass was an hour. Carrie David is an hour. And there's going to be a lot. And I'm going to stay on. And what I'm going to be doing that day is most of the proceeds. You have to understand that a lot of people didn't quite get this with John's show. When people send in super chats, like I want to raise money for charity, obviously, like John did. But YouTube takes 30% of your super chats off the top, and you don't get those. You get those like once a month, and then tips as well. So I do want to do what John did, and I want to make money for charity. And I've got different charities. I actually researched charities. One of those is Gary Sinise's charities for a charity for first responders. And I thought what John did was pretty great. I mean, I don't expect I'm going to raise $12,000, but I am going to put proceeds aside from what we do for charity after. I mean, I don't know what their tax ramifications. Like you when John takes in $12,000, a chunk of that goes to taxes. You have to take into consideration how that's all going to work, because when you go through super chats and stuff, all of that is meticulously charted by YouTube, and they send that information to the government. But yeah, so I want to do that. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm going to go on for at least 400 minutes. I'll see where it's at. Anybody who sends me videos, whatever you've got, I mean, it's pretty packed. And what it's going to allow me to do is I can get up and go to the bathroom, or I can have food or get some water or something while these play. But I'm going to leave, the chat will go on, and people can send in chats to me, and I will come back, and I'm not just going to have half the show be here's the interviews. I'm going to go in and out of the interviews and read chats and play people's videos and stuff. It's going to be pretty fun. I'll be busting my ass all the way up until then, because I have been editing the interviews. And by the way, all the interviews are really interesting, and I will be releasing each interview in its long form as both a podcast and as a separate video. So that's what I'm going to do. So yeah, it's going to be fun. So I'm going to start at noon. I'm going to go for at least 400 minutes. And that means it'll go from noon to 6 o'clock, 6:40 p.m. I'll probably, if we do Elizabeth, we probably should. I might just have Elizabeth come on, and we'll just keep going. I'll have her come on, and we'll do another viewer's choice movie. I'm not sure what that will be. We're supposed to go on tonight. We might go on, I don't know yet. We might go on tomorrow. Elizabeth's might be tomorrow. I'm just going to do some more work in here. But our new movie for Elizabeth is the first animated film, The Triplets of Belleville. So that's what we have going on. So there you go, Mukbang. There you go. Nizzo Strizzo sends in a super chat and says, are you familiar with Tim Heidecker's On Cinema? I'm familiar with Tim Heidecker, but I have not seen On Cinema. I would assume that's either a YouTube show or a podcast. I don't know. Star Wars Rocks sends in a tip. I'd like to find out. I'll look up Tim Heidecker's On Cinema. Star Wars Rocks sends in a tip and says, hi, Rob. I sent in a tip, I think it was last week, when I said that I want to be an actor, a voice actor, and a director, but I don't know how to write a screenplay. I have ideas for stories, but I don't know how to fill in the screenplay part of a script. Any tips? Because we don't have any bookshops anymore in Gibraltar, so I really don't know what to do. Well, there are great resources online. The first thing you need to do is you have to understand screenplay format. And I mean, I can give you a few lessons, like don't write camera directions in your description. Remember, think about this. What you try and do, like in your descriptive paragraphs, and remember, descriptive paragraphs, 4 sentences long. That's just formatting. You can read all about this formatting, but screenplays are a visual medium. So what you're trying to do, even though they're written, when you set the stage, you're trying to say, okay, let's say 2 characters are entering a room. I always say this quickly. You don't write John walks into a room. You write John strides purposefully into the room, or John bounds into the room, exuberance emanating from him. Something like that. You've got to paint a visual picture through your words, and then write good dialogue. That's all. But go, just write. You can Google screenplay format, and that would be the place that I would begin. But if you don't have any bookstores, maybe you could go to Amazon and you could get electronic versions. But there are books like Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. There is Sid Field's screenplay books. Those are good places to start. So yeah. Maurice Kane sends in a super chat and says, Rob, I'm turning 40 tomorrow. Well, happy birthday, Maurice. 40 is, I like my 40s for the most part. I'm turning 40 tomorrow. I'm celebrating by recording content with my fiance for our upcoming pop culture show. Thanks for being an inspiration. Well, I have to tell you, one of the more fun things that I have done as of late is do whining about movies with Elizabeth. I thought, to be honest, it started a little slow. But now that Elizabeth has become used to the camera, and she's delightful, and I think we have a really fun banter and as far as a couple thing to do, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's really fun because we don't, I told her when she's going to tell me about a movie, I'm like, no, save it for the show. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun doing the show with Elizabeth, and it is. I find it very, very. It's kind of sexy. It's kind of fun, and I think you're going to have a great time. What a great way to start your marriage. That's a great way, and happy birthday. That's cool. I'm glad I was. I'm a big proponent of everybody doing stuff. Go out there and make something. I mean, why not? What's cool is when you make something. It didn't exist before and you went and made it and you're like, hey, I made this, whether it's painting a model or whatever it is. I love that. I think it's great. Fortunato Montresor sends in a tip and says, Westworld has gone full cyberpunk. Its verisimilitude in regards to humans and replicants, boiled down to a quick thought. If we can't tell the difference, does it matter? Give it another look, Rob. I need to jump into Westworld Season 3. Well, here's the thing about Westworld. I think it does matter. Because there's something, replicants in the Blade Runner universe were actual biological beings. They're physical, as Roy Batty said. But the hosts in Westworld they're machines. So I think they are machines. And I think it does matter. But I will, I'm definitely going to take another look. I can't wait to get to it. Eric Grant sends in a tip and says, I like the convenience of streaming, but my inner paranoiac wonders, what if the internet crashes or a service provider decides to change rates? Until Netflix or Disney Plus allows me to download my own personal copy of a flick, streaming feels like renting. It is renting. That's why owning physical media is the way it is, the way it's at, the best way, I think. Claudius sends in tips and a 5-part question. Bonsoir, Monsieur Robert Cavard. You ask about plot holes, verisimilitude. I say, how about The Last Jedi, Monsieur? Yes, I said it. I'm rehashing The Last Jedi. Call me petty. What Sarlacc bone am I picking? Dropping bombs in space. Boom. You know what, though? Okay, I'm going to let you go on. Yes, dropping bombs in space, it shatters any semblance of physics in Star Wars. I admit Star Wars has been shaky on space physics. Think about it, dropping rack-mounted bombs in a bay that has gravity. Okay, that momentum will continue in space. It will. Hang on, I didn't mean to jump ahead. Mice. That requires the bomber to enter the dreadnought shield barrier and the range of their surface cannons. In my humble opinion, one should deploy a swarm of bomblets that are either guided or independently hone in on targets. Secret, we do it now. Yes, we do. We do it now, monsieur. I understand that the visual swarm of bomblets changing direction in space was not Rian Johnson's vision. He wanted a classic World War II era bombing run, but this is Star Wars. There should be advanced tech. A bomb is a droid. Let's see, you have a 5th one up here. Robert, nickname Barry Barry. I hope you love the unnecessary use of French even when Elizabeth Bell is not around. Stand by for my next letter. An X-Men Willow mashup. Merci, mon ami. Well, thank you, Claudius, and thanks for supporting the channel. I very much appreciate that. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, can you tell us more about the specific charities who will benefit from the 400th show? I think it's ambitious to select several rather than one, so I'm curious. The only one that I've decided upon is Gary Sinise's charity for first responders and veterans. And the reason that I picked this charity is you can go, there are places online that actually rate charities. I've always loved Gary Sinise. This is an old charity. I've actually was told about it by a veteran friend of mine years ago. And they talk about the transparency level of how much money and of the donations that actually gets to people. And his is one of the highest rated charities. And I'm going to look at others. I'm going to publish a list beforehand. I also want to find out, there's a couple of legal issues that I have to deal with as well. Like, can you just say that you're doing this? I don't really know yet. Like, John picked one charity. I'm probably going to have 2, not very many, 1, 2, or 3 that cover a gamut of things. But obviously the people that need it the most. But that's what I'm looking for. And I'll have that answer either tomorrow or Sunday. But yeah. Dark Helmet sends in a super chat and says, "What history of Hollywood documentary do you recommend?" That's an interesting one. The history of Hollywood. You know, there's what comes to mind are more documentaries about, like, there's a documentary, I think Kevin Burns made it. Not Ken Burns, but Kevin Burns, on how Cleopatra was made, the movie Cleopatra. It was like a 2.5-hour documentary. I don't know if it was done for AMC, but it's an amazing documentary about that period in time and how things got made. That was the first thing that jumped to my mind, but yeah, I thought that was a really good one. That was a really good one. I'm going to jump back to a letter. Man of Stan writes, "Rob, I'd like to hear your opinion on the recent growing trend in reboots. I myself don't mind the idea of an occasional reboot here and there, as they can be very enjoyable if done right. But I really don't like this recently emerged Sisyphean cycle of rebooting the same story franchise umpteen times, like flogging a dead horse. Batman, Spider-Man." The trend, this is, by the way, he wrote that. "This trend has taken on the feeling of a downward spiral. Some part of the fanboy in me dies when we're reduced to fawning over the latest new belt buckle variant sported by the latest version of our endlessly rebooted hero. Sorry, but I need more than that to sustain my interest as a fan. There truly seems to be a moral hazard nakedly on display here, with story franchise owners having descended into the sheer laziness of rehashing existing story properties, primarily to milk existing fan bases and brand recognition, with little regard for freshness, creativity, or real entertainment value. How are new story properties supposed to emerge when past dinosaur behemoths are hogging the media landscape and sucking up all the oxygen of attention? That being said, I'd like to hear from you sometime on which stories you feel are most worthy of being rebooted, why, and what new angles, if any, would underpin them." Well, Man of Stan, first of all, a fantastic letter. I want to thank you for writing that letter. Look, I am for emphasis, I once again go to the Robservatory, and I look at everything around me and circling around me, literally all around me. There's just stuff, and you look over. I just look over the comic books. So you got Justice League, right? But you got Commandy, you've got the Justice Society, you've got the Fourth World, Jack Kirby. There's David Gerald's War Against the Couture. Graham Masterton's The Devils of D-Day with Elmeek, the Demon of Knives and Sharp Edges. Ray Garton's Live Girls, Vampire Strippers. Robert McCammon's Stinger, okay? Those are just a few paperback books I have on one shelf in a Robservatory that's filled with, I guess, I don't know, wouldn't know, thousands maybe, books. It kills me that there are people that are, look, I understand movies are too expensive now. They're too expensive. And when you have franchises that are tried and true moneymakers, Batman is a tried and true moneymaker. Christopher Nolan's Batman movies became very lucrative. If you look at the amount of money they made, it's a sure thing. And now that movie studios seem to only be making movies that cost $100 to $200 million, they can only make 8-10 movies a year, maybe. They have to go back to these tried and true things that are repeated over and over again. But you know what? As I've always said, all of these people had to start somewhere. Star Wars was a risk. And I think that we need to get back into making, like, why doesn't somebody make Robert McCammon's Stinger? I don't know. I have no idea. It drives me crazy. I think you're absolutely right. I think that reboots, what's really strange is I don't think, like, there's an aversion, of course, to anything that's not a known IP because somebody's going to fail. That was the funny thing. I mean, I've always said, when I worked as a development executive and I worked as a reader, I read so many scripts. Some of them were based on properties that should have been made. And you're like, the people, most people, now it's different because a lot of people that work in Hollywood grew up as fans. So that's why you get things like Umbrella Academy getting made, or you get The Boys getting made, which is really great. And I think more and more people are getting into the realm that are fans of this stuff, that know this material. But for the most part, the problem with Hollywood is they don't even know. They don't know what's good and what's bad. There's a million, where to start, where to begin. If you're an Ivy League educated studio executive at 30 years old, and there were when I was there, and there is now, how much stuff do you really know? I mean, the fact that Matt Reeves' company announced they're making Clifford Simak's book Way Station that I desperately wanted to make, that gives me hope. I mean, I think Way Station could be it doesn't have anything to do with the Shawshank Redemption, but in terms of the way that movie could make you feel if it was done right, you could get a Shawshank Redemption movie feel out of a movie like Way Station. Who knows? But it drives me crazy. I think you're absolutely right. There's so many good things, and that's why when I look at streaming, there's all this interesting, cool stuff that's being done for streaming concerns that makes me feel good, because it's like, wow, look at the diversity here. But studios now, their lack of originality is strange to me, because all of these franchises started somewhere. You know, Fast and the Furious did not start out as $1.5 billion grossing franchise, and we need more of that. We need more of those things happening, and I'm right there with you. Now, in terms of what I would do, what I would reboot, you know, I think there's a lot of interesting, like Logan's Run. They've tried to make Logan's Run forever. I've read so many different versions of that script. I really like what Bryan Singer was going to do, that Chris McQuarrie had rewritten. I thought that was really interesting. And Logan's Run could be a trilogy right away. That's something I would like to see rebooted. You know, and they've tried. They've been trying for decades. They've been trying to reboot that. So many filmmakers have come and gone from that project. So that's something I would love to see rebooted, reimagining. I mean, Hollywood's always been full of remakes, but that's something that comes to my mind. Let's see. Hassan sends in a tip and says, does The Long Night on Game of Thrones look better on Blu-ray? Ugh, looks so much better on Blu-ray. And did you talk about Pushing Daisies with Mr. Fuller? I didn't really talk about Pushing Daisies directly. I wanted to keep our focus on horror in general, with an emphasis on Hannibal. He does dip into Star Trek a little bit. He actually says something really interesting about Star Trek in relation to Hannibal that I don't want to spoil. But we didn't talk specifically about Pushing Daisies. It's more of a discussion of his philosophy of horror, and it's fascinating. I thought it was fascinating. So, yeah, I thought it was really, really good. But yes, Hassan, The Long Night looks so much better on Blu-ray. I mean, the streaming, we watch it streaming, it just looks so bad. Yeah. Mukbang says, what do you think about movies based on plays? I loved Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Hamlet in both forms. Amadeus was evidently a play. It was, but I love the movie. Do you ever inspect plays to mine them for movies? You know, I saw a Broadway show 30 years ago called City of Angels that I really love, that I can't believe isn't a play. But yeah, I mean, I grew up, I saw all the big Broadway shows. My parents and grandparents took me to see everything. I really like plays. I think plays are great, and I think when I love plays, and I love movies that come from plays. But I don't necessarily go to plays mining them for movies. Although I will say this: Jeffrey Combs and Stuart Gordon's one-man show Nevermore, Edgar Allan Poe. My friend Darren Scott, who's now just finished directing along with Rusty Cundiff Tales from the Hood 3, we tried to get that movie made. We tried to raise money, and it was a one-man show, a play that we were trying to turn into a feature, and we actually got screenwriter Dennis Paoli who wrote the play, to turn that play into a feature script. And I desperately want to do that. I would love to. I mean, now that Stuart's passed away, I'd love to raise the money and do it. Dark Helmet sends in a super chat and says, I heard you mention the movie The Final Countdown, and I finally got around to watch it. The dog really hit me in the feels. For those of you who haven't seen The Final Countdown, it stars Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen and Catherine Ross. It's one of my favorite science fiction films of the period. It's basically about the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, and it goes through a very cool laser-generated storm that is a time portal, and the Nimitz finds itself back in 1941, days before the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. And they have to decide whether or not they're going to change history or allow history to continue. And if you've never seen The Final Countdown, it has an amazing John Scott score, and Kirk Douglas is great as the captain of the Nimitz, and it's a lot of fun. I have that Blu-ray. It's really, really, really good. So if you've never seen The Final Countdown, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's kind of a B movie, but it's also awesome. And check it out if you haven't seen it. Let's go. I hear the theme in my head right now. This one comes from Torrin Atkinson. This is a great letter. So Torrin writes in and says, let's talk about the rights of composite beings to not be separated. Hello again. Although a few years back on my blog I had rated and given snarky mini-reviews of the complete Star Trek Voyager series, there were a few episodes outstanding that I needed to finish up, and your recent Robcast that Torrin be served about Voyager reminded me of that. One of those episodes was from the second season, Tuvix. I'm sure you and your listeners know this episode deals with another transporter accident, sigh, this one involving Tuvok and Neelix, and a symbiogenic orchid that fuses their DNA while in flux during transport. This doesn't explain how their two uniforms are fused during transport, but let's not dwell on the minutiae. While the Doctor is working on a way to undo this process, the fused being, Tuvix, lives his life as a crew member over the course of several weeks, and his crewmates, Janeway and Kes primarily, try to come to terms with the whole situation. When the cure is found, Tuvix refuses to submit to the procedure, stating that he does not want to die. After hemming and hawing, Janeway forces him to undergo the transport procedure, which will end the existence of Tuvix, but restores Tuvok and Neelix. This is an interesting episode not only for the concept, but the way the writers handled Janeway and the crew. Throughout the episode, we're meant to sympathize both with Tuvix and with Kes. Without Neelix, Kes lost her loved one. Without Tuvok, his wife and children will never have a chance to be reunited with their husband-father. Not that we, as an audience, have much investment in that, but it's a point well made by Janeway. Tuvix is portrayed as his own man, and it showcased how well he integrates into the ship, problem-solving faster than Tuvok, cooking better than Neelix. For much of the episode, Kes is understandably weirded out by Tuvix's overtures towards her, and she distances herself from him until the last act when she reaches out to him and invites their friendship to grow. This is, of course, the point where the Doctor announces he's found a way to restore Tuvok and Neelix, so we can never see the Tuvix-Kes relationship grow. When Tuvix refuses the treatment, Janeway transforms into a stern executioner, complete with a scene where Tuvix is frog marched down a corridor, complete with military snare drum marching soundtrack. Since Voyager is an episodic show, we, of course, have to end this episode where we began, but I can't help wondering, what if? What if it went for an entire season, with Tuvix as part of the crew, and the crew and audience had more time to adjust? The episode focuses so much on Kes, Tuvix, and Janeway that we don't get any input from the other crew. In fact, they're just as cold to Tuvix when he's pleading his case for life on the bridge. As Janeway stated in the episode, if we had a way to separate him as soon as the merging accident happened, I wouldn't have hesitated. With even more time to accept Tuvix among the crew, would Janeway have honored Tuvix's wishes when the separation option became available? What if Tuvix had resigned as a Starfleet officer? Would Janeway still have marched him to sickbay for the procedure against his will? What if the merging of two crew persons involved different genders? What if Neelix and B'Elanna became B'Elanics? It may not be accurate to say that Tuvok and Neelix died during the initial transporter accident, because in a way their memories and personalities both live on in Tuvix. But certainly as individuals they cease to exist, and it wasn't anyone's fault. So does Janeway or anyone else have the right to force someone to die or become undone so that two other people can be resurrected? If Tuvix is both Neelix and Tuvok in one, then does that count as two votes? My take is that Janeway was wrong to force Tuvix to be separated against his will, and worse, then I think this was one of the many missed opportunities this series could have made to grow and better itself. Imagine if Tuvix remained, even though the procedure existed for them to be separated at any time. And then perhaps over the course of a season his personalities started to fight with one another, or his cells began to break down, or he started to turn into an orchid creature. Sounds like something Voyager would do. And so after coming to terms with Tuvix, now they have to come to terms with losing him. And then Tuvok and Neelix come back onto the show, and they have to deal with all the fallout. I feel like this would be just as dramatic, even more so, than Janeway making the call to end Tuvix's existence. But I think we know that the only reason Tuvix died was because Voyager was episodic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against episodic at all. Discovery and Picard made me pine for it, but can you imagine if the crew of Discovery had more opportunities to evolve over 7 years, rather than just replacing Kes with 7? A more interesting show, I dare to speculate. Agree or disagree? And please let this letter serve as a reminder to give me your mailing address so I can send you the albums and RPG for Spaceship Zero, the darkest of the hillside thickets. Thanks, Rob. Torin, first of all, what a fantastic letter. So, for those of you who don't know, yes, there was an episode where 2 of our main characters in Voyager gets fused into one creature, Tuvix. And Torin, I have to tell you, this is exactly the kind of thing that modern Star Trek should, in fact, do. The idea of what happened on Tuvix was incredibly compelling. It was incredibly interesting. And can you imagine if they did a season arc about this? How, the ramifications of these kinds of things? You could have explored many different science fiction concepts. Obviously, in Voyager, they did a lot of this, where they would have this great situation and they'd fix it by the end of the episode, and the ramifications of what went on were fixed. So on to the next. But now, with television the way it is, you could have a whole season arc dealing with Tuvix, and I think it would be really great. And you really would get into the meat of some interesting science fiction concepts. And I would love to have seen that. Look, I would say that in the way this episode portrays it, it was an accident. And the character of Tuvix, should that character be allowed to exist because of an accident? Well, what if they couldn't put him back right away and he had to exist? They would be working on it all season long, and that would be an ongoing arc. That is fascinating science fiction, and that's ballsy. It's like when they introduced Tom Riker, the transporter duplicate of Riker. At one point they even talked about killing the original Riker and replacing him with Tom Riker. Of course, Rick Berman shot that idea down, but it would have been really fascinating because the Tom Riker character was still in love with Deanna, and no time had happened. Could have been a really great thing. I mean, we'll see. I would like to have seen that. I really would like to have seen that, and I think that could have been some really compelling science fiction that we could have got from Star Trek. And it's but still, I mean, it's really interesting. Really interesting stuff. Our friend Omar94 is here. Hi, Rob. Since your show had technical issues, I want to send a letter I wrote to you again, so here it goes. Just to clarify, you mentioned how I was writing from the UK. That is not the case. I actually live here in the US. My email was created in the UK, so that's why you figured I was writing from the UK. Also, you mentioned how you worried that my letter writing didn't interfere with stuff I'm doing. Not to worry, I write these letters in a short period of time. Now to my question. I know that your show is about entertainment news and discussions with politics, sometimes getting around that. So to loop around that, I have a question. What movies that have politics in them do you like the most? While I really like Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I consider it the second best film with politics in it, as I think that Ivan Reitman's Dave is the best. I love Dave. For you, your moderators, and the viewers, if you haven't seen Dave, I highly recommend it, as it's an underappreciated movie. It's very Frank Capra-esque, starring Kevin Kline, Sigourney Weaver, Frank Langella, Kevin Dunn, Ving Rhames, Ben Kingsley, and Charles Grodin, and is written by Gary Ross, the co-writer of Big, and the writer-director of Pleasantville, another underappreciated movie I highly recommend, with Tobey Maguire, Reese Witherspoon, Jeff Daniels, William H. Macy, Joan Allen, Paul Walker, and Andy Griffith Show fans, Barney Fife himself, Don Knotts. I actually consider Dave to be Reitman's best film, as opposed to most people who would say Ghostbusters. Live long and prosper. Well, Omar94, I think Dave's a great movie, and you're right. I mean, look, when I think of political movies, I mean, that's a really fun film. There's a lot of movies that deal with politics in many different ways, such as, say, the original MASH or Catch-22. I really like the movie 7 Days in May, that's about a coup against the United States government. I really love, say, Lincoln, I think, is a great movie about politics. There's so many different movies, but if you're talking about movies that deal directly with the United States government, I liked a movie called First Monday in October. I remember thinking about the Supreme Court, obviously. I love Aaron Sorkin penned American President, which makes a good double feature with Dave. And I think that, I love movies about politics. I'm dying to see Roman Polanski's new film about the Dreyfus affair. You know and apparently it's an amazing movie. I love political films. I don't shy away from them. I mean, but there's so many. I think when I say political, I think about many different. I think The Manchurian Candidate is a great political movie, even though it's a pulp movie about an American soldier being brainwashed by a consortium of evil villains from North Korea, the communists, China and North Korea and all that. But it still has interesting political ramifications and touches on the Red Scare and things like that. But yeah, I'm a big fan of political movies, man. So that'd be a great list to compile. Like, what are the best political movies? And then you go on to say, I know it's very hard to make a movie, let alone a good one, so I find it a little disappointing when acclaimed directors of beloved and classic movies cannot reach that acclaim anymore. Rob Reiner can no longer reach the heights he once did with movies like Princess Bride, Stand By Me, Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and The American President. Francis Coppola could never reach the acclaim he once had with Godfather 1 and 2, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now. Why do you think acclaimed directors can no longer reach the acclaim they once had? Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, you know, people get older, people change. Also, it's a lot harder to make those kinds of movies in this environment. And I think a lot of the time when people get older, they're just not afforded the opportunity to make the kinds of movies that they used to make. And, you know, Francis Coppola is not going to go make Apocalypse Now or The Godfather now. He's not a young man. And all of the battles he had to fight, people change. You know, they just change. And, yeah. I just think it's a factor of youth. But, you know, like Clint Eastwood or Woody Allen, directors who've continued to make movies almost every year, it seems like. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. I like the fact that you now can get older. Ridley Scott is in his 80s. He's still making movies. And I think some of those movies are going to be great. So, yeah, I mean, people just change. You get older. You got to keep that fire in your belly. And I think it's hard for most people to do so. I mean, making movies, especially now, if all you could do was make movies, but most of making movies, the actual making of the movies is usually a joy, but so often it's just a slog. I mean, the fight to actually get to make your movie is a nightmare. It's a nightmare, and who wants to do that anymore? I mean, even the most acclaimed directors, like if Francis Ford Coppola walked into a room full of studio executives today that are much younger, you know what they would do? They would all whisper behind his back when he left, and they would disparage him. There would be no respect, and they would just say, youth without youth, we're not going to have that guy make us a movie. It's the way of the world, unfortunately. This one comes from Ken K. Hey, Rob, did you see Pierce Brosnan did a live stream watch-along of GoldenEye from his home in Hawaii? Oh, that's where he was. For Esquire magazine, it was pretty cool. He answered a lot of questions, reflected on his time in the Bond role, and was very gracious about the whole experience. He had a lot of positive messages about persevering in these hard times as well. That leads me to my question about the franchise as a whole. If you were in charge of the franchise, what's your next move? What direction do you take Bond in after such a long legacy of great films and stories? How do you ignite a younger audience fan base? What actor would you choose as your lead, etc.? Well, Ken, first of all, I've not watched the whole thing, but I did dip into it. It's so great. Pierce Brosnan was so great for doing it. I was tweeting about the other day, I'm constantly amazed at how much awesomeness has been happening with people that are sequestered away. There's been a lot of creativity and a lot of very worthwhile things to watch, and that was one of them. I mean, how dope is that? That was so cool to watch Pierce Brosnan. What I want to do is I was just watching because the camera's facing him. I want to put on GoldenEye and watch that while he's talking. But I thought it was great. In terms of the James Bond franchise, you know what I would do with the James Bond franchise? I hate to say this. I would retire it. I would. I think that the character of James Bond is, somebody asked me earlier, what would I reboot? Well, the character of James Bond and the world that he inhabited has passed into history. And while you can still do it, you can still do megalomaniacs like Carl Stromberg or Hugo Drax and Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker and all those things. Or you could have a drug dealer like Franz Sanchez or whoever Rami Malek is playing in this new movie. You can do all of that. But I honestly think the James Bond franchise, 25 movies, let it go away for a while. Because the world that James Bond was created in and for does not exist anymore. And I think the problem with the James Bond franchise is, in a way, it's anachronistic. And I think that it's harder. I mean, James Bond worked on this sort of global scale that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. But, I mean, I could be wrong about that. I could definitely be wrong about that. That's why I think that I don't think a younger fan base, younger fans need new characters and new stories that reflect the world they live in today. And I love the fact we're getting 25 James Bond movies, but I could be wrong. Richard Madden, I think, could make a great James Bond after watching Bodyguard. I kind of dig that. I mean, I think it'd be cool. Herman Mueller is here and says, "Hey Rob, I've heard you and Campia discuss Spider-Man exiting the MCU after the next 2 films. I'm hoping you can explain why this is the case. My experience with bridging contracts comes from my days studying to be a petroleum land administrator. Licensing contracts to extract oil and natural gas, more specifically with First Nations lands, tended to be 5-year contracts. Short-term bridging contracts would be entered into in the event that something unusual occurred and a new contract was not reached and in place before the expiry of the existing contract. These are generally short-term contracts that allow work to continue while the next contract gets solidified. Maybe I'm a bit naive, but I would think that both Disney and Sony don't want a repeat of the bad PR that occurred with the last contract breakdown, and this 2-film contract is simply a bridge contract while they hammer out the next contract, allowing for how the MCU and the Spider-Verse will mix and mingle. Or in this case, is this the case, or is Spider-Man actually out after 2 films? Well, Herman, that's a great point. I tend to think no. I think you're right. I don't know if this is a bridge contract. I think they did what they could to save face. There's no reason to pull Spider-Man out of the MCU. It works for everybody, especially if Morbius and Venom 2 work. And if Sony can make their own movies that each make $1 billion and cross over with the MCU, I think it's a win-win for everyone. So I think you're right. But right now, all we know is that he's guaranteed to be in 2 more movies, and that's it. So I think that's the way we have to operate. But I think you're right, sir. I think that cooler heads will, in fact, prevail. Because if it's working for everybody, why shouldn't you continue? You know, why stop a good thing? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me. If it's still going strong, let's make those Spider-Man movies. Why not? Esteban Ramos is here. Hello, Esteban. Again, that name is so great. Hello, Rob. I'm sorry I haven't written to you quicker. To answer your question, yes, I want to publish it, although my biggest fear is it will not get published due to Disney's copyright issues. Yeah, that Wicker Man wooden case looks so beautiful, especially with the engraved title. Yes, that is what I meant by the little yellow Lego box. Do we criticize film directors because of our jealousy? I like to think people have their own opinion on film, TV, or books, as long as the person doesn't manipulate the other to think their way. In these tough times, as film enthusiasts, we need to unite. We all know fan bases can be toxic. Movies are subjective in the long run. Uh-oh. I won't touch that. I'll let that one lie. Respect is something which some cinephiles have lost throughout time. With the rise of social media, society has become more distant from accepting and getting further into criticism and blaming. Slowly, verisimilitude is vanishing from the creative mind, though not everything is lost. I was listening to the Blockbuster podcast that reminded me that I had a letter to finish. In my opinion, German filmmaking isn't the same anymore. The last film that was good, but could have been better, was the film In the Fade. I'm dying to see In the Fade. I would have translated it to From Out of Nowhere. This drama focuses on Katja Czerkesy, played by Diane Kruger, a widow who wants to avenge the death of her recently bailed-out husband and her 5-year-old son killed by neo-Nazis. Then there's the excellent comedy from 2003, Goodbye Lenin, starring Daniel Bruhl. After suffering a heart attack, Daniel Bruhl tricks his mother into thinking the German Democratic Republic hasn't changed at all after the reunification of Germany. Those are my recommendations. On your last episode of Robservations, you talked about The Simpsons. I saw The Simpsons because my cousins were watching it, and I grew up in a conservative family. The Simpsons wasn't a series that my parents let me watch as a kid. I grew up watching reruns of anime from the 1980s. By the way, I'm partly Ecuadorian, and I was born there. I strongly recommend you watch How Much Further. I'm so glad you finished the Hills Run Red special features. That doesn't compare to cutting a video on YouTube. I noticed Elizabeth's Instagram, and she is a passionate illustrator. Her illustrations have a Art Nouveau style to them. Kind regards to you, Elizabeth, and the dogs, Gilbert and Tallulah. Esteban. Well, thank you, Esteban. I'm not up as much on my German cinema, although this past year I was able to get Kamikaze 89, which is something I always liked. And, of course, Wings of Desire is my favorite movie, or one of my top, it's in my top 10. And I have not watched Dieter Bastian's movie that he sent me, but I'm going to. I need to probably watch that before. Maybe I'll make that a Elizaviews movie. We'll do Dieter's movie. But, Deutschland, I certainly buy Blu-rays from there. But yeah, I don't know. I still believe that cinema will come back. I think cinematic storytelling is, even though we're seeing long form on streaming services, there's a lot of great stuff being made, and I'm really excited, whether it's foreign cinemas or not. Yeah. Jonathan Butcher, longtime imagination connoisseur, writes in, happy 400th episodes. You don't look a day over 359. Here's my mock trailer if you want to know what your post-geek friend in San Francisco does on a zero budget. Love you, you big twink. Love and stay safe. Jonathan Butcher. I do not know what Jonathan has cooked up. If this is offensive or not, I don't know. I take no responsibility, but I'm putting it in the live chat. So there you go, Jonathan. I will watch it when I'll put this aside and get off the show. Let's see. People are still throwing in tips here and super chats. Let me see where I was. Where am I? Swag Prop sends in a tip and says, what do you think of the Dune miniseries from 2000? I recently rewatched it again, and while I've always enjoyed it, it felt very much like a staged play with special effects rather than a film adaptation of the book. William Hurt is great as Duke Leto, though. I have to tell you, I liked it. I really liked the Dune. It is totally theatrical, using painted backdrops, and it's sort of this really weird hybrid, but I liked it. And I liked it for that reason. I thought it was really interesting. I enjoyed it. And I liked the sequel. I liked the follow-up, Children of Dune, too. I thought it was good. So yeah, and he was good as Duke Leto. I love William Hurt. I'll watch anything William Hurt is in. That was so much fun watching Dark City again with Elizabeth because William Hurt is in it, and he was great. Star Wars Rock sends in a tip and says, "Hi Rob, I'm just wondering if movie and TV scripts are written on Word or Pages. Most movie and TV scripts are written on software that you get to write scripts on, things like Final Draft or Scriptwriter, I think is one." Because they do all the formatting for you, and screenplays must be properly formatted. That's very important. Bob Kowal sends in a tip and says, this would be interesting for Trek, have a culture or race of melds, beings that come from disparate worlds who undergo custom melding for personal advancement. Dude, I would, that's fantastic. And then the ethical considerations, they're not trills, but what is it like to meld with somebody? What does that do to your original? Those are the kind of those are the kind of Star Trek stories I'd love to see. I totally agree with that. I think that's awesome. What a great idea. Melds. I mean, yeah, what if that transporter accident could be recreated and people were doing that? People wanted to be shared beings. I mean, that's sort of crazy. I'd love to see that. Dark Helmet sends in a super chat and says, Of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath are in my top 5 favorite non-comic book movies of all time. Do you think either will ever be remade? Well, they're Of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath are famous American stories, and those are both great movies. Both of those movies are great, but you know what? Again, how are you going to convince, if somebody says, yeah, I want to remake Grapes of Wrath or Of Mice and Men, how do you convince modern audiences to watch a movie about the Dust Bowl? I mean, I think that's what's problematic, is that you have to convince studios that there's an audience for those things. Sorry, I'm pouring myself some water, and that they're viable in the marketplace. I think that's the most important thing. Can we do that? Can we make those things viable? And I don't know if an audience will go see those things, because certain stories are definitely a product of their time. And I think all people want to watch movies that are reflections of the world that they live in. That's part of pop culture. Nay sends in a super chat and says, have you seen the German movie Lore? It's about a German Nazi family trying to survive right after World War II ended. No, but that sounds great to me. I'll totally watch that. Totally watch that. John Suntress from the Word Balloon podcast, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, John has been crushing it during this time of staying at home. I was watching a little bit of his. He had Rob Liefeld on. It was a hoot. I love Rob Liefeld. I'll watch him on anything. We had him on Collider, but on Heroes. But for those of you who aren't watching, John's been doing some live streams. They're great. So John Suntress of the Word Balloon podcast says the new CW Stargirl show is amazing. CW Stargirl show is amazing. I interviewed Jeff Johns, who created it. I saw the first 5 episodes, a lot of JSA DNA in it. My interview with Jeff drops Monday. Well, I can't wait. I'm glad to hear that. I was really looking forward to that show, and I really like Jeff Johns' comic book work, and I am a fan of what he's done. So, yeah. So that's exciting. But for anybody, you've got to check out John Suntress' Word Balloon podcast. And on Facebook, his streams are popping up, so check him out there. There's great stuff to be had. Stubble McShave says, have the memes of Downfall hurt the movie? Downfall is the Hitler movie that everybody sees. Everybody makes memes. Look, I thought Downfall was a terrific movie, and it's only a small part. Like when you're watching the movie, when you watch Downfall, you forget that the memes are there because it's only the same chunk of the movie that you've seen. And when you get to that, you're like, oh, this is the part. Oh. So I don't think they've hurt the movie because I don't think people, if you sit down and watch the movie, it's still a really, really good movie. It really is. So I don't think, I don't know. I don't think that you could say that it hurt the film because the movie is still a good movie. Speaking of Stubble McShave, would it surprise anyone to know that Stubble McShave has written a letter? And I'm going to read it to you right now. Greetings to the Sheriff of Imagination Righteousness. Or put in another way, greetings, Sir Robert Meyer Burnett. So anyway, I was thinking about the motivations for characters in movies, and especially Star Wars movies. I've earlier brought up my problems with the world building and how it made me unable to suspend my willing disbelief and all the problems with suddenly appearing armadas and so on. But that's not what this is about. This letter is how impactful the characters and motivations are in comparison between the original series and the sequel series. In the climax of the original series, there are both strong character motivations as well as plot motivations for the characters. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you see, in the second half of Return of the Jedi, Luke has a very strong character motivation, and other protagonists have plot motivations. Luke's primary interest isn't about conquering the Empire and destroying the Death Star. Sure, it's probably in the back of his head, but it's not his main focus. Luke's primary motivation is to save his father from the dark side. That's what drives him. In that moment, he doesn't care all that much about the Emperor or the galactic conflict at large. He just wants to save his dad. The other characters' motivations are primarily plot motivations. They want to take down the Death Star and don't have any strong character motivations. This works fine, and the character moments with Luke are the strongest scenes in the movie. The rest is more or less spectacle, with some nice moments. Don't get me wrong, I love the space battle, but it's not very impactful. It's just a really well-executed space battle. The ground battle also has nice moments, but it's mainly action scenes sprinkled in with some comic relief. When you get to the climax of the sequel trilogy, which is the second half of The Rise of Skywalker, it's not quite the same. There are no character motivations. There are only plot motivations for the characters. Since we hadn't been introduced to Palpatine in the previous 2 movies, the main characters had no personal character motivations to bring him down. In fact, most of them weren't even born when he was the Emperor. It's the equivalent to we're hearing that Stalin had risen from the dead and was going to go take over power in Russia. Sure, we would be alarmed and try and stop him, but we wouldn't have a strong character motivation for something that had directly affected us. In The Rise of Skywalker, they tried to make more of a character motivation by making Palpatine into Rey's clone grandpa. It didn't have that much of an impact, which resulted in that there were no character motivations to bring down Palpatine. There were only plot motivations. We need to take him down to save the world. That's surely a worthy goal, but it doesn't do as much for storytelling as when we have a personal connection that motivates you on a fundamental level. Those were my thoughts on the matter. Thanks, Stubble McShave. Well, Stubble, you are correct. I mean, I am no fan of... Actually, it's so funny to me. the more interesting movie of the sequel trilogy is in fact The Rise of The Last Jedi. By the way, I did not address the earlier points that were being made about verisimilitude and the idea of dropping bombs in space. Look, as far as I'm concerned, that when you're dropping bombs in space, the fact that they had space bombers at all presupposes in my mind that they had some kind of magnetic or they had some kind of gravity device that is inherent that's part of those bombs that allows you to drop them in space. You know, it never, like, people are like, how can you drop bombs in space? It looks like they're being redolent of gravity bombers, obviously so. But in my mind, I just chalked it up to the fact that, well, indeed, these things must have some kind of gravity devices in them that allow them to fall. To my mind, it didn't bother me because obviously, look, just like it doesn't bother me that X-Wing fighters in space can't fly like airplanes. But they do, even though they shouldn't be able to. They should be more like Star Furies in Babylon 5, you know, or the Vipers in Galactica. They took into consideration how those would maneuver and thrusters and things like that. But you know, I just assumed the idea of the snub fighters in Star Wars and these bombers, they were able to drop bombs because clearly that technology worked. I didn't think that I was expected to believe that those bombs worked on standard gravity. I never thought that. But I agree with Stubble here, very much so, about the idea of the motivations. I thought the problem is that they didn't plan these. They should have been planning these movies, and why they didn't. The 3 movies, they knew they were going to make them. The 3 movies should have had a very meticulously well plotted out arc for all the characters. Rey should have had an arc. Finn should have had an arc. Poe should have had an arc. None of them do. They don't have arcs. They vaguely touch on them as characters, but there's no arc. And I thought that was the biggest missed opportunity of all. And Luke, by the way, had an arc as well. And I think that the movies have interesting stuff in them, but for the most part, it's just one big missed opportunity, I think. Anyway. Throg Bond sends in a tip and says, why not have Bond and a few trusted close associates try to infiltrate the Illuminati while themselves having to go underground? Make that the theme. No government backing, totally underground. Also, have you seen... I don't know what Blowpit Creek is. I haven't seen that. I don't know what that is, Throg. I don't know. I think that might be interesting, but then again, you're fundamentally changing Bond. I mean, I think the fact that Bond fights for England, I think that's one of the cool things about Bond. But, you might be right. You might be right. Monsieur Allfather, Wednesday and Watcher, your psychological profile is coming into focus. 1, almost famous. 2, La Dolce Vita, the Great Beauty. 3, Live and Die in L.A. Question, what I need to know is which Star Trek character do you relate to the most? Captain James T. Kirk. Absolutely, I relate to Kirk. 100%. I've always related to Kirk. I don't know if I would say, look, I am attracted to movies about the travails of show business and being close to show business and all that, because All That Jazz is one of my favorite movies. But then if you go on, there are other movies that are not. I mean, I would say that All About Eve's about show business too. I guess. I mean, I'm attracted to show business as a profession because I think there's certain complex psychological issues with people. Not that they're crazy or anything, but there's a reason why you want to... I don't relate to painters. I understand. I didn't relate to Hemingway as a writer, but films were something that I could always... I've made films now, so I feel that I have more of a kinship to those people, so I'm attracted to those kinds of movies. But yes, I'm sure you could absolutely work up a psychological profile for me based on those considerations. I have a letter from our man Ian Samuels. Ian Samuels, ladies and gentlemen. Ian writes, Rob and fellow Robservationists. Okay, how about something a little bit more lighthearted? There has been much talk about remakes. There was even talk at one time about remakes of Drop Dead Fred. Most correctly would say you cannot replace the legend Rick Mayall, but they considered replacing him with Russell Brand. Fortunately, Brand's remake of Arthur, the original starring Dudley Moore, was a disaster. Oh man, I was so bummed. And we were saved from Brand ruining Drop Dead Fred. Another great film from the 80s that is spoken about remaking is Back to the Future. Oh, God, please no. Fortunately, this has not been done, but let us imagine that 2020 had a Back to the Future remake. So the original was based in present-day 1985 and in the past 1955, which was based just on maths. The main character is 17 years old and working back to work out what year their parents were 17. So in a remake set in 2020's present day, the past would be 1990. So what happened in 1990 that could play a part in that film? The fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany? Could be mentioned, but the plot needs to very much small-town America setting. Iraq invades Kuwait, and President George H.W. Bush sends out a call to war. The Hubble Space Telescope is launched. Windows 3 is launched. Some interesting stuff. What about what would be seen on TV? Well, Twin Peaks started. The ozone layer was in the news as the hole above the North Pole was discovered. There's also another interesting point. In the original 1955, Doc Brown asked Marty who the president is in 1985. Marty announces with confidence, Ronald Reagan. Doc scoffs, the actor? Who's vice president, Jerry Lewis? Marty from 2020 visiting 1990, Doc can respond, Donald Trump. And Doc can respond, the businessman? Who's vice president, Sam Walton? Just an interesting look at 2020's Back to the Future. Fortunately, there hasn't been a remake, and both Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis have insisted there will not be one as long as they are alive. You know what I would hate? Sometimes sometimes those, you shouldn't remake things. Please, not everything should be remade. That would bum me out. It would bum me out. Oh, Beware the Dark Throg says, I meant Blood Creek. Sorry, I have not seen Blood Creek. I have not seen Blood Creek. You know what? I think I will end the letters for today with another Ian Samuels letter. Because why not? There is one, and since they've been stacking up, I'm going to read this. Because it's going to be, I think, maybe controversial. Ian Samuels once again writes, Rob and fellow Robservationists. As a writer and longtime avid reader, it may come as a surprise to some that I am not a fan of the Lord of the Rings books. I found them dull, overly long, and far too much of the characters journeying from one place to the next. I felt that it was not written in such a way that was interesting or exciting. Despite this, I believe Peter Jackson had done an amazing job putting on screen what many felt was impossible. Some purists of the book like to complain about missing scenes or characters. Tom Bombadil, I put that in myself, he didn't. But I believe the three films are fantastic and some of the best filmmaking ever. I agree. I was a fan of Jackson's early work. I really loved Brain Dead and Bad Taste. I did too. So after the triumph of the trilogy, Jackson decides to do The Hobbit, the prequel to the trilogy, and I was excited. Then the announcement came, it was also going to be a trilogy? So many franchises have gone for the full cash grab option. Two perfect examples are The Hunger Games and Harry Fuckface Potter. He wrote Fuckface Potter. Both split their final parts into two, but for Jackson to do one book in three long films was a really bad idea. They don't even look as good or as epic as the Lord of the Rings trilogy did. The cast were not as good and the execution was awful. Before going to see the final part of the trilogy with friends at the cinema, I decided to catch up by watching the first two parts that were already on Netflix. One issue I had was the chosen title of the second film, The Desolation of Smaug. Before leaving to join my friends, I found myself ranting at the TV. I'm glad I didn't see that one in the cinema. I would be demanding my money back. The Desolation of Smaug isn't even in it. I soon discovered watching the final part at the cinema that the actual Desolation of Smaug happens at the beginning of the third part, despite being the title of the second. I think it was more metaphoric, but you're right. The biggest problem with the Hobbit trilogy was the bullshit love story between a dwarf and an elf, which was invented just for the films. It makes no sense. Rob, as someone who was lucky enough to spend time in beautiful New Zealand making the special features for the DVDs of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, what was your opinion on the overly bloated attempt at the Hobbit trilogy? Ian. Well, Ian, look, I think there's a lot of wonderful filmmaking in the Hobbit movies, and they did a lot of interesting, groundbreaking things with frame rate issues, but there's not a lot of verisimilitude in those films, and I think those movies suffered from a tonally they're all over the place. And I probably like Desolation of Smaug the best. Originally, they were going to make 2 movies. Guillermo del Toro was going to make 2 movies, and I thought that was manageable. And look, everybody wants to make money. And the Battle of the Five Armies had some interesting stuff in it, but I agree. I think that there's too much CGI. There wasn't enough of... I still think there's... I had fun with the Hobbit movies. I enjoyed watching them. But the very story... My problem is, The Lord of the Rings is about the end of the world. It's about apocalyptic evil that threatens to snuff out the world of everybody. Men, elves, everyone. Hobbits, dwarves. The world is at stake. So the story is inherently... You're teetering on the bridge of extinction or annihilation or whatever, whereas The Hobbit was never like that. And the story itself it has not enough drive. It's like, I do love the scenes where the hobbits are the other hobbits and the other dwarves are introduced in the beginning of the movie. I like that scene where they're cleaning up Bilbo's house and all that. But the rest of the movie, I think it would have been pretty cool if Peter Jackson made one movie, made The Hobbit. But then again, those movies did very, very well financially. So I understand where they were coming from. I do. But I just think that they were all over the place. They were all over the place. And I think that it did kind of turn into a shameless cash grab, although there's some great filmmaking on display. There really is. I just think it's just tonally, it's kind of a mess. But I think that was the fault of, they tried to turn The Hobbit into a Lord of the Rings esque story, and it's just not there, including ending with the Battle of the Five Armies. So, I mean, I understand what they were trying to go for, but the story just didn't support it. But you know what? Actually, you make me curious. Let's consult the newfangled thing we've known as the World Wide Web, and let's find out how exactly the Hobbit movies did. I'm curious, and I know you are too. So, let's see. Let's find out. So, the first Hobbit movie, An Unexpected Journey, made $1 billion. $1,017,003,568. $1 billion. $1 billion. The Desolation of Smaug, which came out a year later, made $958 million. Not a billion, but still an incredibly respectable turnout. Now, the Battle of the Five Armies, how are we doing there? 956 for the third one, and 958 for the second one. Some diminishing returns there, but 900. I mean, these movies made. Well, let's see. With Unexpected, what did I say? Okay, so you're looking at $2,900,000,000. So I would say, regardless of what we believe, regardless of whether or not we think that those movies should have been split into, it's an epic, epic, epic win. Epic win. And Peter Jackson made a shit ton of money. And people worked. And I would say that whether you like the Hobbit movies or not, I don't think they besmirch the memory of Lord of the Rings, because a lot of people like those movies, obviously. But hey, they certainly did a lot there. Felix Leiter sends in a tip and says, hate to break character. I'm from South Carolina and in my late 20s. Well, Felix, let me just tell you, I did spend a month in South Carolina. I think I just talked about that earlier on. And I spent most of the time in Greenville, and then I was at Myrtle Beach. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed my time in South Carolina and would love to go back. Hate to break character. I'm from South Carolina and in my late 20s. There was a Jamie Fiddler, not Jimmy, who taught and was the head football coach at the school I went to. He was also in the military and once landed a helicopter on our football field. Wow. Well, this was Jimmy Fiddler. That's interesting, Felix. Wow, I don't know if it's the same guy. I haven't seen Jimmy, and he had a sister. I'll tell you, he had a sister named Trish Fiddler, and his parents were just the most delightful people. So there you go. Well, not to end on a bummer note about the Hobbit. So, Ian, I've read 2 of your letters, so I'm going to dig in and see what I got. I think I'm going to read another letter. Well, here's a good letter. This one comes from Moshe Mohsen Nouri, like Michael Nouri. Mohsen Nouri. Dear Mr. Burnett, I hope this message finds you well. Thank you for your continued efforts in delivering thoughtful and fun discussions for the Post-Geek Singularity to digest, especially during these strange and unprecedented times. I recently watched a short film, which I hope you might appreciate in the same way that I do. I thought that it delivers an interesting and fresh take on a much furrowed field. Horror. British horror especially. Indeed, British science fiction as well as fantasy rarely gets the same chance to flourish and occupy the cinematic field in a similar way that those from across the pond do. Perhaps this might be worth a discussion point. The film in question is called Prey, and feel free to follow this link. Well, I'll tell you what, Mohsen, I will not only follow that link, but I will put it in a live chat so other viewers can follow the link too. Here you go. So there you go, everybody. There's a link. I must declare an interest that the leading actor, Rebecca Van Cleve, is a dear friend who I recently worked alongside on Star Wars 9. I'm a puppeteer and creature performer, wishing you the best in all, and a happy 400th. Well, Mohsen, thank you. Congratulations on working in the industry, and you tell your friend, Rebecca Van Cleve, I'm going to watch her movie. And I think that's very cool. So everybody watch Rebecca Van Cleve in Prey and get back to me and tell me what you think. Now you have no excuse. David Lytle. David Lytle is here. But it's spelled, it looks like little, but David Lytle. David says, I live and breathe for your observations. Good work. It seems to me that trouble of Star Trek of late, even a lot of TOS had forgotten what Trek means. It's a long and arduous journey. Wait, are you telling me what the original series? But most of Star Trek has been about beating the bad guy, especially the movies have been all action adventure for the popcorn crowd, but I think the general public would love intellectually challenging storylines. Where have all the great sci-fi writers gone? Oh, you're talking about the original series. I get it. You're not talking about the original series, you're talking about modern Star Trek. The original series had the likes of Norman Spinrad and Harlan Ellison in their midst. Star Trek should be about the exploration of space, and as Q put it, charting the unknown possibilities of existence. That's the name of our documentary on All Good Things. Then again, I suppose the pressure of episodic TV works against sustained quality. I don't think it does, man. We're living in a golden age of TV. A golden age of TV. There's such good TV on. We're living in a golden age. There's no excuse. Star Trek should be the smartest show on TV, not appealing to a demographic that's never going to embrace it. Star Trek has become, like a lot of things in America, monumentally dumb. I know I've gone off on it, and look, if you like Star Trek, it's fine. It's fine. But where are the big ideas? Where are the challenging ideas? We're moving forward into very interesting... I mean, the idea of doing a season-long examination of Tuvix, or a character that was melded together, and they can't put him back, and they keep working, and then... Can you imagine if you came to like Tuvix? And then, at the end of the season, they figure out a way... And now this character that's endeared him, what if it was a man and a woman fused together, and you came to like this new character hybrid, and then they're going to take him apart, or her apart? What that would do to viewership, that would be the cliffhanger. People would love that shit. But I agree with you. I mean, where are the great, compelling stories and things that have been written about Star Trek? And it's a bummer. It is a bummer. By the way, I have another letter from Roberto Suarez, who sent me a 400th episode video, which you will see on Monday. That is quite good. So, Roberto, thanks for that. I started the show with Roberto's other video. I had it. I don't think I ever played it, other than I kept trying to play it on aborted shows. So, interesting. This letter comes from Jermaine K. Hello, Rob. Thanks for reading my previous letters. Of course, Jermaine. Thanks for writing them. I want to ask you about two of my favorite James Bond movies and get your view on them, but that will be in a future letter. Oh, okay. I love James Bond's subject matter. This letter is about an aspect of Robservations that I really respect: your willingness to tackle tough subjects. On Robservations 396, you tackled the topic of agenda in Hollywood. More to the point, the seeming agenda of elevating women by diminishing men. I believe that agenda is real in a few franchises right now, like the CW's portrayal of Batman in their horrid Batwoman show, and I applaud you for even using the word agenda. Unfortunately, it's become incredibly divisive. I can't read today. Unfortunately, it's become an incredibly divisive word in our society. Politically, culturally, and socially, the reactions are stark and filled with emotion. I'm sure you receive multiple reactions, both positive and negative, when you appear on Midnight's Edge or Nerdrotic. Personally, I really enjoy when you go on with them, and I hope that continues. Still, I'm sure you hear from people accusing you of having an agenda. I doubt the emotional reactions to the word will stop anytime soon. In fact, I think they're only going to get stronger. Thanks for tackling the tough topics, Rob, and I hope you continue to do so in the future. Take care. Well, what a lovely letter, Jermaine. Well, to me, storytelling at its finest is all about tackling the tough subject matter, and yet presenting it in a way that's palatable to all people. Great stories, there's stories that immediately turn people off, but I think stories are inherently, they have to be thoughtful, whether you hear a story told to you or you're watching a story. The fact that you want to consume stories at all presupposes intelligence on your part, so good on you. Because a story is about the human condition. And what you want is you want to have human truths illuminated in those stories. And there is no doubt that the history of humanity is full of people being oppressed and people being victimized. We are not a nice bunch of folks, people. All you imagination connoisseurs, human history is not one. It's been a charnel house. We should all be ashamed of ourselves. We should still be ashamed of ourselves. What bothers me is agenda-based storytelling compromises the stories that are being told. I've said it before. The Burnett axiom: never put your universe before your characters in your story. The same is true of an agenda. It's an addendum to the Burnett axiom. Never put your agenda before your characters in your story. Your story, if you want to tell a story that has an agenda behind it, you have to tell a story. The story itself should illuminate the agenda that you want to address. You don't have to denigrate men if you want to tell a story about strong women. What you can do is you can tell a story to show how women have been oppressed throughout the years, the decades, the centuries, and shine. And some of my favorite movies growing up, like Norma Ray, a woman that fought for labor rights, or you watch any movie about strong women in the past. Pick any movie that Erin Brockovich. Women are always butting up against men, and unfortunately, women were not considered to be equal to men for most of human history. So when you watch movies like Hidden Figures, not only was Hidden Figures about 3 women, it was about 3 black women. And you're watching... Now, I don't think... obviously, telling the story in Hidden Figures about how 3 black women that were also mathematicians. So you have 3 strikes against women in that period of time, but watching how they prevailed and how no one was going to leave, or no one was going to go into orbit without these women doing their calculations, because... despite the fact they were women, despite the fact that they were black, what won out was their ability. Their ability as people that transcended the time. It transcended. You have a pilot of a spaceship whose life is hanging in the balance that would say, you know what? I'm not going anywhere until not those women, not those black women, but not until those people did their jobs, because I believe in their talent. I believe in their ability. And that, to me, yes, is there an agenda behind telling that story? Absolutely. But you know what? At the end of that story, they didn't make men idiots. They made a man risk his life. That's what happened. A man put his life in the hands of those women. And that was what made a statement. That was what was important. That's what that movie's leading up to. And sure, there was an agenda behind making that movie. Absolutely there was. But the agenda at the end of the day was portraying the way life was. I mean, of course, they played fast and loose with the kind of music, but I love that film. That was a forgotten part of history that I think was amazing. And here was a movie that elevated women, elevated black women, and elevated people that shows that knowledge and scientific understanding and ability is important. And I thought that was great. And I don't think when I watched Hidden Figures, I didn't sit there and go, why I feel terrible being a man. No, because there were male characters that saw through, Kevin Costner being one of them. And I think that kind of filmmaking is great. And I love seeing that. Plus, it was a story that not many people knew, and it illuminated a part of American history, of female history in America, and black history in America. All of those things were celebrated and illustrated and illuminated by a movie like that. And that's what I want to see. Because that movie didn't come out and go, we're going to hate men, we're going to hate white people because of the way... No, it wasn't like that at all. That movie was a total celebration. It was a celebration, ultimately, of humanity and human endeavor. And that all of us, can contribute to the things that we do that are great. And I when it comes to agenda-based storytelling, look, I was actually very disappointed. I'm going to call out, I've been a fan of Geeks and Gamers. Obviously, I get along with Jeremy. I've been on Geeks and Gamers. I thought that Geeks and Gamers recutting, I was not on the John Campea show yesterday, but they recut the John Campea show to make John look bad. And I thought that was out of line, to be honest. And John was really upset. Whether you like John Campea or not, John Campea busts his ass. And you don't have to necessarily like his point of view. But John Campea is out there working hard. I mean, nobody works harder to bring you the kind of show that he does. And look, by going out here, I am not saying that we are beyond criticism. Criticize me all you want. I'm sure that there are very vocal people that think I'm a monumental douchebag. And who am I to come online every day and have something to say? Like, why am I doing this? What is he, not tired of the sound of his own voice yet? I'm sure there are people that think about that. But you know what? If you're going to go in and you're going to download my show and re-edit me saying things and make it look like I said things that I didn't say, that's out of line, man. And I think that is a violation in a way. This is why I like our community, and I think it as far as our politics go, I don't like it when people, what they say and what they do is mischaracterized. And that's not fair. If you want to have dissenting points of view, great. If you want to have people that have different ways of thinking, fantastic. On my show, come here. You can say whatever you want as long as it's respectful to the rest of the community. I am willing to talk to you about any agenda or anything you have. But if you're going to start moving my words around to make fun of me that's not fair. That's not fair. If you want to pillory me or make fun of me, that's fine. But don't recut my words and make it look like I said something that I didn't say. I think that's not right. And John was very upset by it. And as a friend, John, as an employer and as a friend, John Campea has been a very stand-up guy as far as I'm concerned. He as a matter of fact, one of the most upfront and stand-up people that I've ever worked for and with. So, it upsets me when that kind of thing happens. But, as far as I'll talk about anything, I want to discuss anything on this show, and I think that it's interesting to me. I've never lived in a time where my opinion or my abilities have been discounted because I'm a middle-class, middle-aged, white, cis male. And there you go. We live in that time. I understand why that time has happened, but, to think that everything that I've tried to do and all the work that I've done with people and the things I've tried to make good, it's kind of a bummer. But anyway, you persevere, you go on, and all you can do is be inclusive and try and move forward. So that's what I do. But thanks for that letter. And World's Greatest Detective sends in a super chat, actually sends in 2 super chats. Rob, sorry I haven't posted here for some time. I want to send you a letter about my newfound love of the original series Star Trek. It's funny, your opinions on modern Star Trek are similar to my feelings on modern Sherlock Holmes. I listen to your show every day, and I love it. World's Greatest Detective, please, 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 please send me your letter on the original Star Trek. I would love to hear it. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings an end to Robservations episode number 398. My God, has it been a pleasure once again robcasting at you from the Robservatory. My God, watch the power is going to go, but it didn't. Maybe what I've done, maybe the steps, the measures I've took will continue to serve me well. We'll see. I will be back tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, and I also remind everyone that tomorrow I will be on the Mainframe Comic-Con live and online tomorrow, and I will be moderating this panel. It is going to be at 2:30 Central Standard Time, 3:30 Eastern Standard Time, and 12:30 Pacific Standard Time, which means I'm going to go on this show. I'm going to jump right off of this and go right on to Robservations tomorrow for episode number 399. And I'm also going to be on doing Mainframe Comic-Con stuff on Sunday. There will be no Robservations on Sunday. The 400th show will be Monday at, of course, beginning at noon. I'll have more. It's going to take me that long to get all these videos and things situated, but it's going to be a barn burner of a show. I think it's going to be great fun. I'm very much looking forward to it. I don't know where that leaves us. And also, I don't know, Elizaviews, I might push it to tomorrow, but maybe not. Maybe Elizaviews will be here tonight. We shall see. It will be the Triplets of Belleville, ladies and gentlemen. The Triplets of Belleville. And as you might know, I want to remind everybody that the podcast of Robservations is now in podcast form. You can get that over at Anchor. I will put this show up as a podcast shortly. But I want to thank everybody for still being here, for coming back and being part of the fun. It's been great coming back here. I'm sorry that the last 2 days have been riddled with technical difficulties, but thanks for bearing with me. And I also want to thank my moderating staff, of course, Mike Bodden, and I want to thank, of course, Detective Jim Boyers and Greg Smith and Louis Yu and Jordy Lyons for making the Post-Geek Singularity community what it is today. I want to thank everybody for writing letters. I haven't got to all the letters yet. There's still a few more. Keep sending them in. I tried to get through all the letters, but I haven't got through all the letters yet, but I've almost caught up. And Ian Samuels, come on, 2 letters in one day. There you go, buddy. And, so, anyway, I will end Robservations episode number 398. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell. You have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, kind people from across the 28 known galaxies, I bid you, I guess I should say, for Claude, adieu.